Chapter 4366. Shan Shan. He screamed and rushed to the door, facing the direction of the door. San San was lying flat on the ground, her chest rising and falling rapidly. In the position of her chest, there was a sharp candlestick inserted upside down. The candle on the candlestick had been thrown to one side and the sharp end of the candlestick was stuck in her chest. Shan Shan held the candlestick with both hands, her eyes wide open. She kept taking deep breaths, but blood kept flowing out from the corner of her mouth. Yu felt like his heart was being cut by a knife. Especially when he saw Shan Shan in such a pitiful state, he felt both vexed and heartbroken. He walked to her side, but he didn't know what to do with his hands. He didn't know if he should touch her. Shan Shan, what's wrong? Shan Shan looked at him with her eyes wide open. She kept spitting out mouthful after mouthful of blood. Bean-sized teardrops kept flowing from the corners of her eyes and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Her blood-stained hand trembled as she grabbed Yu's sleeve. Yu. Shan Shan? Sob, 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 it hurts, it hurts. Shan Shan was in so much pain that she started crying. She kept crying and choked on the blood from time to time. Yu's gaze slowly moved to where she was injured. When he saw where the candlestick had pierced, he knew that the candlestick had pierced her vitals. He couldn't care less anymore. He sadly picked up Shan Shan and hugged her in his arms. Don't cry, don't cry. I'm here with you. Shan Shan was after all a 15 or 16-year-old girl. Under such pain, her whole body trembled and she couldn't stop crying. It hurts, it hurts. Sob, 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 sob. It hurts. When Yu heard this, his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. He hugged her tightly and felt that her body was getting colder and colder because of the excessive blood loss. Am I going to die? Shan Shan hugged Yu's arm reluctantly as tears blurred her eyes. Yu forced a smile. How can that be? Don't worry, you won't die. I promise you, I won't let you die. But I'm in so much pain, what should I do? Even if a person's vitals were pierced, they wouldn't die instantly. Under the condition of excessive blood loss, they would face a long period of pain. Shan Shan's eyes widened and she kept sucking in cold air, as if this was the only way to calm the pain. Yu was so sad that he was suffocating. How could this be? He couldn't tell if he was in a dream or in reality, or somewhere else. He didn't understand why he had to go through this. It must be that young man. Why would he do such a thing? Why would he do such a cruel thing? He didn't understand. What he didn't understand was whether he was the one controlling the plot, or whether it was the brain that was controlling them. As for him, the only difference between him and these personalities was that he was the main personality. This was determined from birth, and no one could shake his position. Otherwise, how would he be any different from these personalities? Yu. In his arms, the girl's breathing calmed down. It was a strange kind of smoothness. It was as if she knew that she was not far from death and she couldn't escape from it. Yu lowered his head. Shan Shan was looking at him deeply. My name is Liang Yishan. Liang Yishan. Don't forget me, okay? Even if I can't live, I want to live in your heart. Chapter 4367. Yu's heart ached as he hugged her tightly. Shan Shan used the last of her strength to say to Yu, when I'm not around, Yu have to become stronger, braver. Yu held her hand tightly as his vision became blurry. Gradually, Shan Shan's hand fell from his palm powerlessly. There was a loud bang as if something had exploded in his head. He finally understood. Behind him, he heard the sound of footsteps. Yu let go of Shan Shan and carefully placed her on the floor. He stood up and turned around. At this moment, the young man was already in front of him. The young man was a head taller than him and had a similar face to him. However, they were not exactly alike. Instead, the young man's facial features were filled with ruthlessness. Yu looked at him fearlessly without a trace of fear. When the young man saw him like this, he was slightly surprised. He closed in on him. Why? Not running anymore? Running? Can I run forever? Yu did not retreat. Instead, he took a step closer to the young man. I understand now. Shan Shan is one of the personalities in my body. She was timid and afraid. No matter what, she was always careful, hesitant, and worried about personal gains and losses. She represented the weak personality in my body. Now that Shan Shan, she's dead, it means that I won't be as weak as before. The young man was slightly stunned and his eyes narrowed. It's you who killed my cowardice. Yu slowly put his hand behind his back. Behind him was a pair of scissors that he had secretly hidden in his waist belt. Just now, when he was strolling around the room, he saw the scissors. Out of self-preservation, he casually put it in his hand. The young man's gaze moved down and landed on him. He laughed coldly. Do you think you're my match? Humph. You overestimate yourself. As he spoke, he strode forward and reached out his hand. He grabbed Yu's throat and lifted him up easily. The young man was so arrogant that even though he knew that Yu had a weapon in his hand, he didn't take him seriously at all. Could it be that this personality represented the violence in his body? It was this personality that had hurt Mommy. Yu accepted this fact and began to struggle violently. However, the youth's strength was too great. Gradually, his feet left the ground. Yu struggled and clenched the scissors in her hand tightly. Then, she recklessly stabbed at his arm. The youngster glanced at Yu from the corner of his eye. He raised his other hand and effortlessly grabbed Yu's hand. He grabbed Yu's wrist with great force, causing Yu to feel pain. Yu's hand loosened, and the scissors fell to the ground with a thud. I've said it before. No matter how many of you there are, you are no match for me. Perhaps it was due to the anger that Yu had attacked him, but the violence in the youngster's body completely exploded. He threw Yu away with all his might. Yu only felt that his body was as light as a kite. In the end, he landed heavily on the table. He somersaulted and fell to the ground. He curled up in pain. The young man walked in front of him and looked down at him. Then, he lifted his leg and kicked him to the side in disdain. Yu had no way of retaliating. Chapter 4368. Are you Yun Tianyu? The youth walked toward him with a sinister smile. How long are you going to occupy this body? Occupy? Yu was so angry that he laughed. What do you mean by occupying? This is my body to begin with. You shouldn't even exist. Oh? Why shouldn't I exist? The youth's eyes were cruel as he yelled hysterically. Why should you exist but not me? Then, according to what you said, this idiot shouldn't exist either. Yu knew that the idiot the youth was referring to was the dead Liang Yishan. He was even more furious. You are really unreasonable. The youth closed in on him. I don't care what you say. I only know that as long as I kill you and everyone else, this body will belong to me. What makes you think so? Yu said coldly. I won't let you have your way. Won't let me have my way. The youth's face was cold. I'm not just saying this. You're not as good as me. What do you have to fight me? As the youth said this, he bent down and pulled out the candlestick from Liang Yishan's body. He then closed in on him. Go to hell. The young man roared and swung his sword at him. Yu could not retreat in time and could only watch as the candlestick was about to pierce his forehead. When the candlestick was less than an inch away from his forehead, the youth's body stiffened, and his scarlet eyes stopped moving. Yu widened his eyes in shock. Without caring about anything else, he snatched the candlestick from his hand. The youth staggered. He wanted to turn around to check what was going on, but in the next second, his body fell limply to the ground. Behind him, Gong Fan, whose face was covered in blood, panted heavily as he looked at the youth's collapsed figure. He knelt on the ground weakly. At the same time, the vase in his hand fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Gong Fan. Yu threw the candlestick aside and rushed toward him to hold his arm. How are you? Are you all right? Are you all right? Even now, Gong Fan was still concerned about his safety. I'm fine. How about you? How do you feel? Just a little bit of blood. It's fine. Gong Fan was very stubborn, but Yu's heart ached. At this moment, his face was covered in blood, covering his brows and eyes, to the extent that his eyes were dyed red. Where's Shan Shan? When the two of them arrived in front of Shan Shan, Yu realized that Shan Shan had already stopped breathing. Her eyes were wide open and there was a hint of reluctance in them. Gong Fan found it hard to believe. He did not know what had happened and only heard a cry of surprise. He did not expect that it was Shan Shan who had been attacked. He put his finger under her nose and listened to her pulse, but there was no reaction. Shan Shan. For some reason, even though he hadn't spent much time with Shan Shan, he still felt a bit of heartache. Yu took a deep breath. Instead of crying, he calmly closed her eyes and hugged her tightly. Shan Shan. I'm sorry. I promise you, I'll be braver in the future. Chapter 4369. Unknowingly, Yu Yu's arms had become empty. He was still hugging him, unwilling to come back to his senses. When Gong Fan saw this, he gently held his shoulders and said with difficulty, Let's leave this place first. Why? Why are you so cruel? Yu Yu still felt heartache. Gong Fan couldn't bear it and hugged him tightly. It's over. Everything will be over. Yu Yu bit his lip and hugged him tightly. I definitely won't let you disappear like Shan Shan. Okay. Gong Fan replied, I won't leave your side. The two of them supported each other and left the manor. The night breeze blew. Alice and Gong Jie sat in a bar by the beach. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, they looked at the lonely figure sitting on the beach with heartache. Alice sighed. He seems to have been sitting by the beach for the whole day. I don't know what he's thinking. Ever since he woke up, he hasn't said a word. His eyes are red, but there are no tears. He doesn't answer any of my questions. He's in a daze alone. I don't know what happened. When Gong Jie heard this, he raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. Perhaps he was too tired in the dream. He needs to calm down and adjust his state of mind. Tell me, what kind of dream was it? Alice was a little anxious. Logically speaking, no matter what happened in the dream, the boy would definitely tell her everything from the beginning to the end. However, this time, Yu Yu chose to remain silent. However, Alice could tell that Yu Yu was exhausted from this dream. Something must have happened. Alice nudged Gong Jie's shoulder. Why don't you ask him? How? What should I ask? Just ask him why he's so depressed. If he doesn't cooperate, we don't know how to proceed with the treatment plan. Gong Jie said disdainfully, You're his doctor, I'm not. But you're his uncle. Gong Jie was speechless. Alice continued to beat around the bush. You promised Sher that you would take good care of him. Why? Since you're an uncle, is there a problem with showing concern for your nephew? Gong Jie. He had no choice but to drink the wine in the cup in one gulp. Then he stood up, gave her a cold sidelong glance and left. At night, the sea breeze was strong. The lights floating on the sea were like stars in the sky, rising and falling with the waves. One wave came, followed by another, and the air was filled with water droplets. Yu Yu hugged her knees and sat by the beach. Her gaze was far away, but it was unfocused and unfocused. He seemed to be lost in thought, so much so that he didn't notice Gong Jie sitting beside him. Gong Jie passed him a bottle of beer. Do you want a drink? Yu Yu realized that he was walking over, but her expression didn't change. She asked calmly, Does Mommy know that you're making her nephew drink? When Gong Jie heard this, he retracted his hand resentfully. You're using your mommy to pressure me again. Because you like it. It's a tried and tested tactic. Gong Jie burst into laughter and ruffled his hair. Brat. Tell me what happened. Gong Jie glanced at him. You've been sitting here for so long. What are you thinking about? Ha! I'm not thinking of anything. Chapter 4370. Gong Jie noticed that he was in low spirits, but he did not think much of it. If there's nothing wrong, why do you look so glum? Yu Yu muttered. How am I glum? You look so glum, and you're asking me why you're glum? Yu Yu stopped talking. Gong Jie placed his hands behind his back and closed his eyes, feeling the slightly damp sea breeze. Yu Yu did not want to answer, so he was not in a hurry to ask. In the dead silence, Yu Yu said bitterly, I killed me. Gong Jie was taken aback when he heard this. Clearly, he did not understand what the other meant. What do you mean? Gong Jie did not know whether to laugh or cry. Killed you? Why would I kill you? Besides, aren't you fine? I don't understand what you're saying. Yu Yu was obviously exhausted. He buried his face in his arms. Unknowingly, tears fell silently. Gong Jie did not notice that he was crying. Yu Yu buried his face in the crook of his arm as he cried silently. Gong Jie saw that he did not want to say anything else, so he kept quiet and accompanied him quietly. You're indeed my nephew. When I was young, I liked to sit by the sea when I was in a bad mood. I would feel the sea breeze and I would think things through. Yu Yu looked up but did not say anything. The night was getting late. Yu Yu stood up and turned around. He saw Gong Jie lying on the sofa, asleep. Was this really his uncle? Alice must have asked him to come over and comfort him. In the end, not only did he not comfort him, he even leisurely lay on the sofa and fell asleep. Yu Yu's eyelids drooped and he stepped on Gong Jie's stomach. Ugh! Gong Jie sat up in shock and groaned in pain. What are you doing? What are you doing here? Faced with Yu Yu's question, Gong Jie looked dazed. After a while he answered honestly, Alice asked me to come over and check on you. And then, you fell asleep on the sofa. In the face of Yu Yu's cold humph, Gong Jie said disapprovingly, why don't you give me a chance to care about you? You're just squatting here, motionless and silent. How am I supposed to comfort you? Yu Yu was stunned for a long time. When she saw the aggrieved expression on Gong Jie's face, she suddenly felt that her uncle was extremely cute. She couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha 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 ha. Yu Yu suddenly burst out laughing. Gong Jie was even more stunned and dumbfounded. Are you stupid? Ah ha 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 ha. What are you laughing at? Gong Jie stood up angrily and grabbed his collar. Are you laughing at me? Ha ha ha. Uncle, you're really too cute. Yu Yu laughed so hard that tears came out of her eyes. Gong Jie looked at him and suddenly stopped being angry. After a moment of silence he said sympathetically, if you're upset, you can just cry it out. Yu Yu laughed and slowly stopped. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How am I upset? I'm not upset. I just feel that your aggrieved expression is really funny. If you want to cry, just cry. Why are you crying because you're laughing? Chapter 4371. Although I don't know what happened to you, you always say things that I don't understand. Gong Jie paused for a moment and squatted down again. He held his little face gently and rubbed it. But I will be like mommy and stay by your side forever. No matter what happens to you, you will always be my nephew, okay? Yu Yu clenched his teeth tightly. After hearing Gong Jie's words, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He clenched his teeth and tried to hold back his tears. Gong Jie knew that he had wanted to cry for a long time. Now that Yu Yu was crying, it meant that he had let go of his worries in front of him. Gong Jie's heart ached as he hugged him and said helplessly, if you want to cry, just cry. Why are you still holding it in? If you keep crying in your heart, you will fall sick. As soon as he finished speaking, Yu Yu finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He cried loudly and wantonly. Boo-hoo. Has he confessed? Alice looked at Gong Jie as he walked into the laboratory and asked. Gong Jie had just sent Yu Yu back to his room. Yu Yu said that he was tired and wanted to lie down on the bed for a while. He thought that since he had cried for so long, his eyes must be sore from crying. Gong Jie closed the door and left. After hearing what he said, I feel that it's a little unbelievable. Alice was a little curious. Tell me about it. Gong Jie told Alice everything that had happened in Yu Yu's dream. Alice listened and was silent for a long time. She also felt that it was a little unbelievable. I finally understand what Yu Yu meant when he said that he had killed himself. Ha! Actually, Yu Yu has a sense of guilt in his heart. Among all the personalities, the mysterious young man was probably the violent personality that was nurtured in his body. He didn't notice it before, and the girl named Liang Yishan was the weakest personality in his body. The violent personality killed the weak personality. Although this meant that Yu Yu's feelings for the girl were too much. He must have felt that he was the one who forced the girl to die. Personally witnessing the death of one's personality is a very shocking thing. Alice said calmly. However, the fight between the personalities is not an accident. There had been such examples before. A person with multiple personalities was hypnotized into that world. The personalities fought each other, and all the good personalities decided to work together to kill the evil personality. When Gong Jie heard that, he immediately asked, what happened in the end? In the end, I realized that the evil personality was the real master personality. Alice smiled and said, in the end, the criminal was sentenced to life imprisonment. Then, what do you think of Yu Yu's current situation? Is it optimistic or not? Alice shook her head with a serious expression. From what I see, it's not very optimistic. Gong Jie suddenly became nervous. Ha! What do you mean? First of all, He has been constantly traveling back and forth between that world and the real world. He has used up a lot of his mental strength. Moreover, in that world, he has been constantly experiencing things that he can't bear. This has put a lot of stress on his mental strength. So, for now, I think it's better to slow down and treat him conservatively to avoid a mental breakdown. Then, Gong Jie asked again, "What did Romanka say?" Chapter 4372. Gong Jie fell silent when he heard that. Alice said, "There's an old saying in Country Z, when the car reaches the mountain, there will be a way out. Don't be too anxious. Take one step at a time. No matter how meticulous the plan is, it's impossible to plan everything." "I understand." Gong Jie stood up. "Rest early." In the room, Yu was lying on the bed. His eyes were unfocused. He seemed to have adjusted his mental state. He closed his eyes and wanted to enter the dreamscape. Just as he was about to fall asleep, someone knocked on the door. He suddenly felt anxious. "Who is it?" Lisa's careful voice came from outside the door. "It's me, Yu. Are you asleep? Get lost. Don't disturb me." Yu lost his temper unexpectedly. Originally, he was about to fall asleep, but he was strangely not sleepy tonight. He had almost forced himself to fall asleep. Being disturbed at a critical moment, he became irritable. Lisa didn't expect Yu to shout at her. One had to know that Yu was known for his gentle temper, unlike Gong Fan, who was always cold and aloof. Such a gentle person actually threw a tantrum at her. Although she felt wronged, she didn't say anything and left quietly. After Lisa left, Yu closed his eyes again, but he couldn't fall asleep. Hence, he stood up, walked outside, and rummaged through the cabinets. It wasn't easy to find a sedative in the medicine box. This was placed here by Alice. Moreover, the side effects were minimal. If he really couldn't fall asleep, he could take this medicine. Yu swallowed the pill and returned to bed. About half an hour later, the effects of the medicine finally took effect. His eyelids drooped heavily. He entered the dream again. When Yu woke up, he was in a boundless forest. He opened his eyes in a daze and saw Gong Fan's figure leaning against a tree. He didn't have time to bandage his wound and it was still bleeding. Yu came back to his senses and climbed over nervously. He asked worriedly, "Does the wound still hurt?" Gong Fan said nonchalantly, "As long as you're not dead." Yu was speechless. Even if you're injured in this world, your body is still fine in reality, isn't it? That seemed to be the case. When Yu heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. "Does it hurt? Do you feel any pain?" Gong Fan was stunned and nodded. "Yes." "Is it exactly the same as if you're injured in reality?" "Yes, the wound is very real. The pain is also very real," Gong Fan said with a smile. Yu looked around. "Where are we now?" "I don't know, but we're already far away from the manor." Pursing his lips, he made up his mind. "I've decided. Yes. Let's pull ourselves together and find the other personalities. Then we'll kill them all. In this way, only the two of us will be left." When Gong Fan heard this, he couldn't help but gasp. He asked a question, just like that man we met in the hospital. "Do you think we're his match?" Yu was so embarrassed that he fell silent. That man was very powerful. More importantly, he had a strong murderous aura. Chapter 4373. Let's not talk about that man for now. Gong Fan continued. In this world, other than that man, there seem to be other personalities. Just now, we spent a lot of effort to deal with that young man. In front of him, I feel that we don't have the ability to fight back at all. All right, let's not talk about these two people for now. Then, if you meet a kind personality like Shanshan, would you be able to do it? Yu fell silent again. He couldn't be sure if he would be able to do it if he met a personality like Shanshan. Then what should we do? Yu was suddenly at a loss. Gong Fan laughed and shook his head. He said helplessly, "I don't know either. We can only take one step at a time. Yu, we don't know how many personalities there are in this world. There might be more. However, we can't beat that man alone." Yu muttered to himself, "If only Xiao Yichen was here." Haha. At this time, you think Xiao Yichen is good? Xiao Yichen is very powerful. I'm sure that even such a strong man would only need a few moves to defeat him. It's a pity that Xiao Yi-chen is your brother, not your personality. Yu couldn't help but lower his head in disappointment. Let's rest for a while first. We'll make plans when the sun rises. Gong Fan lay down beside him. Through the mottled shadows of the trees, they could see tiny twinkling stars in the blurry night sky. He raised his hand and pointed to the sky. He smiled at Yu and said, "Look, that star is very small but very bright. Although it looks very small to the naked eye, it might be a very big planet. Yes, but it's very far away from us. I didn't expect to see such a beautiful night sky in a dream like this." Yu said emotionally, "To be honest, the scenery here is indeed not bad. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be such a beautiful island in reality." When Gong Fan heard this, he suddenly said, "If that's the case, we can travel around the world in our dreams." The two little guys leaned against each other and began to chat. "In the future, I must invent a dream machine. What is a dream creator? If possible, I hope that the dream creator machine is a pillow that can affect brainwaves. When people sleep on it, they can have countless beautiful dreams and see the scenery of the world. That's a good idea, but with the current scientific methods, it doesn't seem to be possible." Yu said, "That will have to wait until I grow up. Who knows, maybe when I grow up, I will really invent the dream maker." Gong Fan smiled and patted his head. "Why did you spend your smart brain on such things? What's wrong? It wasn't some kind of crooked practice. Isn't it enough to invent some beautiful things? Nowadays, many people don't like to have nightmares. If there's a pillow like that, no one will have nightmares. That kind of pillow must be very expensive." Yu reacted abruptly. "Why are we talking about such a meaningless topic? Who knows? You were the one who started it." Yu sat up and looked around. He suggested, "Why don't we walk around? Maybe we'll find something new?" Gong Fan nodded. That's good too." Chapter 4374. The two little guys stood up. They had not walked far when suddenly, there was a slight movement behind them. Yu suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned around warily. He felt that something was following behind him. Gong Fan saw him turn around again and couldn't help but become vigilant. "What's the matter? I feel that there's a strange sound. How is that possible?" Gong Fan turned around and sized him up. "Why didn't I hear it? Could it be your imagination? Didn't you hear it?" "Yes." Yu exhaled. "Maybe it's my imagination. Maybe it's the movement under our feet. I heard wrongly." He continued to walk forward. They were in a forest and there was a patch of grass under their feet. No matter how careful they were, it was inevitable that there would be a slight movement. Yu had only taken a few steps when he heard the strange movement behind him again. He stopped in his tracks. This time, even Gong Fan heard it. His suspicions were aroused when he heard the boy's words earlier, so he paid attention to the movements behind him. As they walked forward, sure enough, someone was following them from behind. "Someone." Yu lowered his voice and said to Gong Fan. Gong Fan nodded. "I heard it." They were not loud and had some reservations. However, the footsteps behind them seemed to be following them and made them wary. "What should we do?" Yu looked at Gong Fan worriedly. "I'll count to 1, 2, 3 later and quickly run in the south direction." "Can you still run?" "It's okay, I'm fine." "Okay, got it." Gong Fan and Yu tacitly reached out their hands. Their hands were tightly clasped together. They pretended to be calm and walked forward. 1, 2, 3. The moment Gong Fan reported the number 3, the two little fellows immediately broke into a run. Their movements were fast. The mysterious figure behind them clearly did not expect them to suddenly run. After a brief moment of being stunned, he quickly caught up with them. Gong Fan and Yu didn't run very fast, but their advantage was that they weren't very tall. They ran through the dense forest without any obstacles. In the forest, the branches were low. Gong Fan and Yu were like agile leopards as they shuttled through the dense forest. Gradually, they ran out of the forest and were surprised to find that the familiar manner was reflected in their eyes again. "We're back." Gasping for breath, Yu let out a defeated groan. Gong Fan did not even have time to catch his breath. He pulled Yu and ran into the manor. "Should we split up? Distract him?" Yu made a suggestion. Gong Fan shook his head. No, I'm worried about you. All right, let's move together. The two little guys ran up the stairs one after the other. When they reached the highest floor, they lay on the escalator. The escalator in the manor was circular. Lying on the escalator, they could clearly see the figure walking up from below. Soon, that person rushed into the manor and followed the footprints to the escalator. Gong Fan's heart skipped a beat. He lifted his feet to take a look. Indeed, there were some mud spots on his feet. When they ran through the forest just now, the soles of their feet were the mud in the forest. Chapter 4375. Gong Fan followed his gaze and looked down. He saw that at the bottom of the building, a man was looking upstairs and quickly discovered them. Their gazes met. This man who had followed them all the way here was actually the mysterious man who had fought with them in the hospital. It's him. How could it be him? Could this man have followed them all the way from the hospital? Just as Gong Fan and Yu Yu were still in shock, the man had already caught up with them quickly along the stairs. Gong Fan and Yu Yu exchanged glances. They did not have the time to be emotional. They turned around and groped their way into the rooms one by one. Most of the rooms were locked from the back. Gong Fan and Yu Yu pushed open the doors one by one. However, they suddenly heard another set of footsteps coming from the end of the corridor. Yu Yu looked towards the end of the corridor and saw a blurry figure standing there. It was an ugly girl. She stood at the end of the corridor and saw Gong Fan and Yu Yu. Immediately after, her face, which seemed to have been slashed by a knife, revealed an extremely sinister smile. They are there. Gong Fan and Yu Yu were stunned. This girl seemed to know them? But they had never seen this girl before. At this moment, a young man walked over from beside the girl. And this young man was the one who had killed Shanshan's personality previously. The girl pointed at Gong Fan and Yu Yu and ordered arrogantly, "Kill them!" The young man's gaze was sinister as he quickly closed in on them. The girl was still dancing with joy. "Kill them, then we can merge into one and truly occupy this body. Kill them, kill them." What should we do? There was a wolf in front and a tiger behind. Regardless of whether it was going forward or backward, they had been completely blocked. Yu Yu only felt his scalp go numb. "Yu Yu, here." Gong Fan kicked open the door of a room and pulled Yu Yu into the room. All the rooms in the manor were locked from the inside. Gong Fan locked the door from the inside and kept looking around. He walked to the window and pushed it open. He saw a row of narrow windows outside the window. Usually, it was used to put some potted plants as decoration. It might be dangerous for adults, but they could walk on it and force their way through. "Yu Yu, maybe we can go through this window to another room and avoid them. But, are you afraid?" Yu Yu looked out of the window with lingering fear. They were on a very high floor. If they accidentally fell down, they did not know what would happen. At this moment, the door was kicked open with an earth-shattering sound. Yu Yu did not have time to consider so much. "Let's give it a try." "Okay." "Gong Fan, be careful." "Okay, I'll go." Gong Fan was the first to climb out of the window. Yu Yu followed closely behind and climbed out as well. The two of them were just able to stand firmly on the narrow windowsill, and carefully made their way to another window. "Do you see it? There's a small flower bed on the floor below. We can jump onto that flower bed first." Gong Fan pointed at him. Yu Yu saw it too. He took a deep breath and jumped down. When Gong Fan saw it, he followed closely behind and jumped down. The two of them had just jumped down from the flower bed when they heard a girl's sharp scream from above. "They're there." Chapter 4376. Gong Fan and Yu Yu looked up and saw that the girl and the young man had already broken through the door and thrown themselves in front of the window. "Here, go in from here." The two of them jumped in through an open window. Yu Yu grabbed Gong Fan's hand and ran toward the door. The moment the door was opened, Gong Fan woke up abruptly. He had woken up from his dream. When he opened his eyes, he realized that he was lying on the bed. The first thing he saw was Alice's flustered face. "Yu Yu? Or Gong Fan?" "I'm awake." Gong Fan sat up immediately and realized that there was not only Alice, Hua Jin, Gong Jia, Luo Menka, and Xiao Chen in the room. And beside the bed, Yun Shishir was leaning against Mu Yaja, sizing him up in fear. I'm Gong Fan." Gong Fan was still immersed in the nightmare just now and his heart was still palpitating. In the dream, the few of them were still fighting. Why did he wake up at this critical moment? Gong Fan was suddenly at a loss. Yun Shirshir opened her mouth and wanted to go up and hug him, but because of Alice's previous warning, she held Mu Yaja's hand and did not move. After her wound healed, she did not care about recuperating and rushed over without stopping. She was worried that if she was a little later, she would not be able to see Gong Fan for the last time. Now that she saw that Gong Fan was fine and safe, she did not dare to breathe a sigh of relief. She was worried that she would really lose Gong Fan before she could comfort him for long. This was really a complicated feeling. Yun Shirshir sat down by the bed. Gong Fan, are you okay? Mommy! Gong Fan's eyes turned red when he saw Yun Shirshir. He never thought that he would be able to see Yun Shirshir and Mu Yaja again. He was filled with emotions. He sniffled and said sadly, "Last time, it really wasn't me. It wasn't me. I didn't do anything to hurt you. Even if others don't believe me, you have to believe me." When Yun Shirshir heard this, she felt as if a knife had been twisted in her heart. She held his hand tightly and emphasized, "If Mommy didn't believe you, why would I come to see you? Why would I accompany you? How could Mommy believe that Gong Fan, whom she dotes on the most, would bear to do something to hurt me?" When Gong Fan heard this, he was relieved. With reddened eyes, he snuggled into Yun Shirshir's arms. Even though Yun Shirshir's wound had not completely recovered, she did not push Gong Fan away. She hugged him tightly, even if it affected her wound. Alice watched from the side. After hesitating for a while, she had to interrupt them. "I really don't want to disturb your war moment, but I still have to say something. Gong Fan, since you're awake, why don't you tell us what happened in the dream?" Gong Fan then reacted and said nervously, "What should we do? Yu is in danger now." "Danger? Do you still remember the dangerous young man I told you about before?" Alice and Romanka looked at each other and nodded. "He's not dead yet. Not dead." And there was another girl who appeared with him. They seemed to have a clear goal, which was to kill you and me. Then they could replace us and take over our bodies. I guess you and I both suspect that he was the one who stabbed Mommy. Chapter 4377. Alice analyzed. In other words, he has appeared before, but was it only that one time? Probably. This personality is a rather violent one. Gong Fan frowned. Actually, he should have appeared more than once. Then what about the other man? Luo Manka mentioned the most important point. No matter how powerful that young man is, he might not be a match for that man. Gong Fan shook his head. Who exactly is that man? What is his motive? Why has he been following me and you? We don't even know the reason. It's very mysterious. Has he hurt you? No, he doesn't have the chance. Mu Yaja gently tugged at Yun Shirshir and said to her, "Now, let's leave this room first. Alice and this professor should take good care of Gong Fan. We won't be of much help to the child here." "Okay." Yun Shirshir nodded hesitantly and left the room quietly with Mu Yaja. When Gong Jie saw this, he also followed them out. Hua Jin also felt that it was not convenient to stay here, so he told Lisa to stay and also left quickly. Outside the room, there was a row of stools. Yun Shirshir sat down on the stool with a pale face. Although her wound had barely healed, the deeper wounds were still in the process of healing. Because she had rushed over from afar, it was inevitable that her wound would be affected. After getting off the plane, Yun Shirshir insisted on coming over to see Yu despite the jet lag. Mu Yaja couldn't stop her, so he let her go. "Now you've seen that Yu and Gong Fan are fine. You should rest well." Mu Yaja comforted her. Yun Shirshir shook her head. "I can't sleep well. If you don't listen, then I won't let you stay." Yun Shirshir raised her head and looked at Mu Yaja with tears in her eyes. However, she saw that the man had a firm attitude and was obviously unwilling to give in. "You said you wanted to see Yu, so I brought you here. Now that Yu and Gong Fan are safe and sound, if you don't take care of yourself, I will get angry." After their marriage, Mu Yaja and Yun Shirshir treated each other with respect, and there was almost no argument between them. Mu Yaja had never been angry with her and always let her do whatever she wanted. This was the first time she had seen anger on his face since they got married. Yun Shirshir immediately begged for mercy. "I know I was wrong. All right, I got it. I'll sit here for a while and then go back to rest." Seeing that Yun Shirshir was still worried, Gong Jie comforted her. "Sister, I'm here. What are you afraid of?" Yun Shirshir wanted to say something but stopped. Gong Jie probed. Are you afraid that you won't see Yu or Gong Fan again when you wake up? Yun Shirshir sucked in a deep breath of cold air. Despite her heartache, she nodded. Yes. Sister, don't be afraid. Gong Jie squatted down in front of her, gently grabbed her hand and kissed her fingertips. There are so many of us guarding you. What are you afraid of? Are you still worried about me? If anything happens, I won't hide it from you. I'll tell you immediately. Now you can go to sleep in peace, right? Yun Shirshir nodded reluctantly. Chapter 4378. Got it. Go and rest in peace. Gong Jie rubbed her head dotingly. Even though Yun Shirshir was her sister, this scene would make people who didn't know better think that Gong Jie was the older brother. Yun Shirshir smiled. After Mu Yaja and Yun Shirshir left, Gong Jie stood guard outside the door. In the room, Alice didn't mince her words. Gong Fan, from what you said, it seems that the situation isn't optimistic. Then, let's adjust the treatment plan. Alice and Romanka sat down by the bed one after another and said with a serious expression, Now, we request that if you return to that world, you must kill that young man and that girl by hook or by crook. Also, find the other personalities. If they are bad personalities, kill them directly. Don't leave them alive. Okay. Romanka asked. Do you still remember that manor? Gong Fan was stunned. Yes. That manor is the place where the other personalities live. After all the personalities are gone, you must burn that manor down. Then what about that hospital? Professor Romanka and I agree that that hospital is Yu's original spiritual world. You don't have to care about it. In other words, the hospital represents the main personality, and the manor is the place where the other personalities are born. If we don't care about the manor, then there will be an endless stream of personalities coming out of the manor. Gong Fan frowned and suddenly realized the seriousness of the matter. He shuddered. But I've been in that manor since I was conscious. That place is like my home. Why didn't I notice anyone else at that time? Alice said, trying to dispel his doubts. At that time, you didn't establish a connection with the other personalities. They didn't know of your existence, and you didn't know of their existence. The reason why you can see them now is because Professor Romanka created a dream through hypnosis. All the personalities gathered together and could see each other. Otherwise, you wouldn't even see you. In other words, before this, I didn't have a connection with the other personalities. So, we didn't know of each other's existence. I see. But why was I the only one discovered by you? They misjudged that Yu has dual personality disorder, but it's actually multiple personality disorder, isn't it? Alice said. You're wrong. These personalities are still immature. From now on, that manor is no longer your home. Your home is this body. You will become one with Yu. Everything else is not important. Do you understand? Gong Fan nodded his head seriously. Now, do you have any questions? I'm afraid. Even if you and I work together, we won't be a match for that young man and that man. Gong Fan still had a lingering fear. They are too powerful. I see. At this moment, Alice was also at a loss as to what to do. She looked at Romanka blankly. Romanka said, I don't know what to do about this either. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. Romanka shrugged. Although it can't be said to be solved by force, perhaps it can be solved by wisdom. Wisdom. In short, you have to think of a way. None of us can do anything about this. We are not in that world, so we can't give an intuitive opinion. Chapter 4379. Gong Fan got out of bed and did a checkup. He ate some food to replenish his energy. Then, Luo Manka brought him to the fitness center to train his body. Because he had been lying in bed repeatedly during this period, Gong Fan's physical fitness had declined rapidly. After training for an hour, Gong Fan rested for a while. After dinner, he lay on the bed. He entered the dream world smoothly. Gong Fan woke up in that world. When he opened his eyes, he realized that he was in a room. Footsteps came and went outside the door. Yu was beside him, leaning against him tightly. Seeing that he was awake, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. What's going on? Gong Fan saw that the door and windows were locked. The moment he spoke, Yu shushed him warily. Don't make a sound. They're looking for us outside the door. Yu pointed outside the door. Gong Fan immediately nodded. He lowered his voice and told Yu about Alice and Luo Menka's instructions. Yu widened his eyes in shock. Are you crazy? How can the two of us be a match for those two guys? Let's not talk about that man for now. We can't even defeat that young man. Gong Fan's face was dejected. There's no other way. This is our biggest predicament now. Yu leaned his head against the wall. Let me rest for a while. When Gong Fan fainted, Yu helped him down to the first floor. He was so tired that he was half dead. Fortunately, the young man and the girl had not discovered them yet. If they broke through the door, they would escape through the window. Anyway, they were on the way, so they would not be injured if they jumped through the window. If they jumped in through the window, they would turn around, open the door, and run out. However, after enduring the fear for so long, Yu was a little tired. He rubbed his temples and felt that the two of them were really cowardly. If it were Xiao Yichen, he would have gone out and killed them. At this moment, Yu began to envy Xiao Yichen's muscular limbs. Gong Fan said dejectedly, "Don't mention Xiao Yichen anymore. It's not a good idea to keep hiding here." Yu suddenly stood up and carefully searched the room. Seeing this, Gong Fan asked curiously, "What are you looking for?" "Let me see if there's anything convenient that I can use as a weapon. I can't fight him with my bare hands, right?" Gong Fan immediately walked over and picked up the candlestick on the table. "I think this is not bad. The bottom of the candlestick is very hard and the tip can pierce people. It can attack and defend and is easier to hold. It's just a candlestick. If I use it, what will you use?" Gong Fan looked around and saw a vase on the windowsill. He braced himself and picked it up. He pouted and said, "This vase will do. It can also be used for defense." "Why am I so worried about you?" Yu sized up the vase. "It feels so fragile. It will break if I touch it. It's better than being bare-handed. I feel like I don't have any confidence if I don't have anything on me. Is there a gun in the manor?" "I don't know. I don't think so." Gong Fan was silent for a while and suddenly thought of something. "I remember that there was a shotgun hanging on the wall in the reception room of my room." "Shotgun? What shotgun?" Chapter 4380. Is this place far from your room? I'm a little lost. I have to go to the corridor to recall the layout. Yu took a deep breath. After confirming that there were no more footsteps outside, he mustered up his courage and opened the door. There was really no one outside. He probably couldn't find him here and didn't want to go upstairs. Yu was a little afraid of this young man. It wasn't because he was timid. It was because the young man's murderous aura was too terrifying. "I know where this is," Gong Fan recalled. "My room. You have to walk along this corridor and turn left. The first room at the end is mine." Yu looked around. The empty corridor inevitably gave him a creepy feeling. "This place gives me a bad feeling." As Yu spoke, he said to Gong Fan, "Let's go to your room." "What if our footsteps attract attention?" Yu raised his eyebrows. "We can crawl over," Gong Fan said. "Can you be more serious?" "I'm already very serious." Yu smiled and grabbed his shoulder. "Actually, as long as you're here, I'm not so afraid. Anyway, I have you. I'm not alone." Gong Fan's heart couldn't help but be touched, but he didn't show it. Instead, he turned his face away awkwardly, but his eyes narrowed into a smile. The two little fellows tiptoed towards the room where Gong Fan was. They were constantly paying attention to the noises around them. As they were vigilant, they tried their best to tread lightly. Soon, they arrived at Gong Fan's room. As soon as they entered the room, Yu saw the shotgun hanging on the wall. His eyes lit up. "There's really a shotgun." Gong Fan was also relieved, but he was still a little worried. "I don't know if this gun can be used. I always thought it was just a decoration." "Let's try it. At least, it's a deterrent, isn't it?" Yu immediately went forward, stepped on the stool, and took the shotgun from the wall. He fiddled with it but couldn't figure out what was going on. He wasn't good with guns, especially shotguns. He didn't even know how to load or change the bullets. Gong Fan said, "This is a shotgun. It doesn't have a long shooting range, but it's very powerful at close range. The bullets of this kind of gun scatter widely, and it shoots out several bullets at once. As long as one or two hit the target, it will be enough to make him suffer. I heard that being shot by a shotgun at close range is explosive damage. Yes, Gong Jie said. I've heard from Gong Jie that if the shotgun hits the head at close range, the scene would be spectacular. Oh, so heavy. Gong Fan immediately walked over and took the shotgun from Yu Yu's hands. He looked at it carefully. There were bullets in the gun, but not many. After checking, he found that the bullets were the more common 12GA bullets. The gun was indeed quite heavy. Even Gong Fan found it difficult to carry it. Just as the two little guys were engrossed in studying the shotgun, Gong Fan was the first to feel a murderous aura coming from behind. He turned around abruptly, only to see a figure appear at the door. The youth stood at the door. When he saw the two of them, his eyes lit up. So you're here. Chapter 4381. The youth smiled evilly with a carefree expression. I've been looking for you for a long time. Yu Yu heard the commotion and turned around. When he saw that it was him, he instinctively stretched out his arm and shielded Gong Fan behind him. He warned, "Don't come over." Gong Fan hugged the gun tightly and hurriedly loaded it. He raised the gun and aimed it at him. When the black muzzle was pointed at the youth, the latter was stunned. He was indeed intimidated. He stood where he was and did not move forward. He just looked indifferent. I was wondering why you stopped running when you saw me. It turns out that you have guns in your hands. However, do you know how to use a gun? He narrowed his eyes and his tone was extremely disdainful. Do you dare to kill? Yu Yu could not help but shudder. Gong Fan gulped and immediately calmed down. Yes, we haven't killed anyone. However, if you dare to take a step forward, we won't care so much. Yu Yu questioned, who exactly are you? What's your name? Name? The youth tilted his head and laughed coldly. Who do you think we are? We're just orphans. Names? We don't have names. Only you have names. When Yu Yu heard this, he did not think much of it. What do you mean? What do you mean by orphans? We were exiled. No one cares about us at all. Ha! Isn't that so? Gong Fan's hand, which was holding the gun, suddenly trembled. Yu Yu took a deep breath and felt his scalp go numb. Now, they should not hesitate to shoot the young man. However, in the face of a living person, perhaps it was not appropriate to call him a person. In the face of a living personality, Gong Fan really did not have the courage to pull the trigger. He felt that it was too cruel to do so. He had never hunted anyone before. It was too cruel to force him and his other personalities to kill each other. Just as he was hesitating, the youth reacted quickly and pounced on Gong Fan like a cheetah. His target was very clear. In fact, Yu Yu was the closest to him. However, he did not pounce on Yu Yu because Gong Fan had a gun in his hand. Naturally, he would deal with the number one threat first before dealing with the rest. Yu Yu exclaimed. She wanted to stop him, but it was too late. The young man pushed Gong Fan to the ground and snatched the gun from his hand. His strength was not something an ordinary person could resist. Gong Fan was completely powerless in front of him. The shotgun fell to the side. When Yu Yu saw it, he rushed forward recklessly and hugged the gun as he rolled around. He no longer cared about the last bit of kindness in his heart and shot the young man in the back. Bang! For Yu Yu, even if it was a shotgun, the recoil was too much for him to handle. The head of the gun tilted, and the bullet hit the wall, forming a hole, and a layer of dust fell off. Oh no! He missed. Yu Yu was so annoyed that he wanted to shoot again, but he didn't know how to load the gun. He was so anxious that he broke out in a cold sweat. The young man was startled. He turned around and stared at Yu Yu with his bloodshot eyes. Without a doubt, this spear had thoroughly infuriated him. To him, Yu Yu's shot was undoubtedly a great provocation. He was provoking him. The youth was about to get up when Gong Fan grabbed his sleeve tightly. Don't hurt him. Chapter 4382. The young man laughed when he heard that. I couldn't tell that you guys are such close brothers. Get lost. He kicked Gong Fan away and walked toward Yu Yu. He was sure that Yu Yu wouldn't know how to load the gun or use it. In addition, he rushed over so quickly that Yu Yu couldn't even react in time. He made a decision subconsciously. No matter what, the gun couldn't land on him. Hence, He threw the gun far away. In the next second, the young man pounced on him like a wolf. Yu Yu was pinned to the ground and a punch landed on his face. Ugh! Yu Yu groaned in pain and stared at him in disbelief. You! Bam! The young man punched again without holding back. This punch made Yu Yu feel a real shock in his head. It was so painful that his eyes were filled with pain. Why? Let me ask you why. The young man was almost roaring. Why do you deserve to be loved and doted on, while I have to stay here and suffer in silence and loneliness? Why am I the one who was abandoned while you are cared for by so many people? I hate you. Gong Fan sat up. Just as he was about to stand up, he felt a strong sense of dizziness. His head was already injured. When the young man threw him to the ground, his wound was hit again and he was about to lose his balance. While he was in a daze, he vaguely saw the unfamiliar girl quietly walk to the door and see the chaotic scene in the room. She caught a glimpse of the gun from the corner of her eyes and was stunned for a second before walking towards the gun. No. Gong Fan immediately became alert. He couldn't let such a dangerous weapon fall into the girl's hands. He held his head and staggered toward the girl. The girl saw him walking toward her and screamed. Then, she quickly picked up the gun from the ground. However, the gun was not loaded at the moment. It seemed that she didn't know much about guns. Hence, she fumbled around anxiously for a long time but still couldn't figure out how to load the gun. The girl was so anxious that she broke out in cold sweat. Gong Fan stopped him. Calm down. We're all the same. Why do we have to kill each other? The girl's scarred face was filled with anger. We are not the same. We are all orphans. Only by killing you can we become the owners of this body. Otherwise, we will only be at the mercy of others. Thinking of this, the girl no longer hesitated. The teenager strangled Yu Yu's neck and suddenly said, "Hold the gun handle and push the handguard forward." That's loading. Don't you remember? I taught you. The girl came to a sudden realization. She pulled the shotgun and successfully loaded it. Kill him. The young man's voice sounded like a curse. The girl pointed the gun at Gong Fan. The black muzzle of the gun was emitting a cold aura. Her finger was on the trigger. With a slight pull, the bullet would rush out of the muzzle and mercilessly pierce through his body. Gong Fan was still some distance away from her. Just as the gun was pointed at him, he suddenly retreated. Bang! Gong Fan fell backward to the ground. With a burst of sparks, the bullet hit the leather sofa behind him, creating a hole. Chapter 4383. The girl's attention was immediately diverted by this voice. In his confusion, Yu Yu felt that the youth's strength had loosened a little because he was distracted. From the corner of his eye, he saw the man who had been following them all the way rushing in. He felt a sense of despair. Presumably, this young man, and this girl were the same. They all wanted nothing more than to kill him and Gong Fan. However, just as he thought this, he saw the man rush toward the girl and snatch the gun from her hand at lightning speed. He held both ends of the gun with both hands and used his knee to break the gun into two. The man threw the gun aside, grabbed the girl's collar, and threw her out of the door. Seeing this, the youth's heart ached. He roared and pounced on the man. Yu Yu's brain was in a state of hypoxia. The youth suddenly let go and oxygen rushed into his body, causing a moment of dizziness. He fell to the ground weakly and no longer had the ability to control his body. However, Gong Fan still retained a trace of consciousness. He looked at the man in a daze. He did not deal with them immediately. Instead, he fought with the youth. They fought barehanded and the sound of flesh could be heard. Just by listening to the exaggerated sounds of the punches, one could imagine how painful it would be if those fists landed on one's body. The man and the youth were equally numb. It was obvious that they had no reaction to the pain. However, there was a huge difference in physique after all. The youth was even faster and was at a disadvantage. The man knocked him to the ground with a punch. Moreover, his methods were so sharp that the joints of the youth's arms were dislocated. Ah! The youth's bones were broken and he cried out in pain. He hugged his arms that were hanging weakly by his side and the veins on his forehead were exposed. Why are you helping them? He asked hysterically. Gong Fan was a little stunned. This man wasn't their enemy, but had been silently helping them all this time? Thinking about it carefully, it was indeed not bad. Even though this man was strong, Even though this man had been following them from the beginning until now. He had even followed them from corners that they did not notice. However, from the beginning until now, he had not done anything to hurt them. It could be seen that this man's strength was far above the youth's, but he had not hurt them at all. What was going on? Kill them. The young man panted heavily and said to the man, "Otherwise we, including you, will never see the light of day again." This was unfair, wasn't it? We didn't even get a good look at that world? Why did he have to live in such a dark corner? We have the right to exist too, don't we? The man listened, his eyes empty for a second. The young man thought that the man was moved and tried again. Wake up. Even if you help them, they might not be grateful to you. What do you gain from doing this? The man was stunned. While he was distracted, the young man used the last of his strength to pull out a sharp dagger from his waist belt with his dislocated hand and stabbed it into the man's thigh. Hiss! The man let out a muffled groan and his legs twitched involuntarily. Even though the young man's hand was dislocated and he didn't have much strength, the wound wasn't deep, but it was still painful enough. Chapter 4384. The man got up from the ground. Enduring the pain, he grabbed the dagger in his leg and pulled it out. In an instant, blood gushed out. Gong Fan was dumbfounded. This man seemed to be saving them. Could this be the sanctioner that Alice was talking about? Or could it be the kind and righteous personality in Yu Yu's body? The youth's hands were dislocated. He kept trying to put his arms back together, but he had no strength left. Both of them were covered in cold sweat. The youth also gave up resisting. He fell to the ground and leaned against the wall, his eyes empty. Why? He tilted his head and looked at the man. He was crying and laughing as he muttered, "Why do you want to destroy all my dreams? I just want to live well. Live well. Could it be that this is also wrong?" The man took a deep breath but did not speak. Could it be that he did not know how to speak? Gong Fan was a little suspicious and asked carefully, "Who are you?" Hearing this, the man turned around and looked at him deeply. At that moment, a gentle smile gradually appeared on his cold face. This smile was enough to melt the hardest ice in the world. Gong Fan was stunned. Yu Yu also gradually woke up. The killing in front of him seemed to have come to an end. He opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but the man had already made his move. He walked in front of the girl and gripped her throat tightly with his large palm. The girl slowly woke up from her temporary coma and felt the man's murderous intent. Her hands struggled wildly and her legs kicked wildly. "Don't kill me. I beg you, don't kill me." A trace of helplessness finally appeared in the man's eyes. "I'm sorry," he said as if he could not hide the guilt in his heart. The strength in his hand kept increasing. Gradually, the girl let out struggling and suffocating sounds. Her eyes suddenly widened. After kicking her legs, they stiffened and stopped moving. When the youth saw this, he was so shocked that he stood rooted to the ground. Yu Yu and Gong Fan looked at each other. They also felt that it was too cruel and could not bear to watch. The man carried the girl up, walked to the windowsill, and gently threw her downstairs. In an instant, the girl's body gradually shattered, turning into millions of tiny stars that gradually dissipated. "No!" The young man crawled up from the ground in a sorry state and rushed to the window. However, he could only watch as the girl's body turned into specks of stars and drifted into the distance with the wind outside the window. The muscles on his face stiffened, and countless howls of grief choked his throat. When he turned his head back, his eyes were scarlet red. "I will kill you." Even though he no longer had the ability to resist, the pain of losing his best friend made him desperate. He threw himself at the man without a care for his own safety, but the man calmly held onto the hilt of the knife. In an instant, the sharp tip of the knife pierced his chest. The young man didn't even have time to see the man's hand movements before he felt a sharp pain in his heart. He lowered his head in shock, only to see the dagger that had pierced through his chest. His eyelids twitched fiercely as he staggered back and fell to the ground. He could only watch as blood flowed out, but he was powerless to resist death. Chapter 4385. The man remained silent and only looked at him silently. The young man broke down and shouted, "I just want to live, I just want to live well. Why is it right for all of you to be unscrupulous in order to survive, but I can't do the same if I want to live? This is not fair. This is not fair." As the young man spoke, He suddenly choked and spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Gong Fan stood up shakily and went to the young man, looking at him pitifully. The young man coughed and cried, "Why can't you let me live? Why can't you tolerate me? Why? Don't I have the right to exist in this world?" After shouting for a while, his eyes suddenly widened and he stopped moving. The man came in front of him, squatted down and sighed. He slowly placed his hand on the young man's eyes and gently smoothed them out. The young man closed his eyes and his body gradually turned transparent. Slowly, he turned into a star and disappeared. Yu didn't know why, but when he saw this scene, he felt sad. The young man gradually disappeared. The dagger fell to the ground with a crisp sound. The man picked up the dagger. Gong Fan couldn't help but be alert. He stood in front of Yu and looked at him warily. You won't do anything to hurt us, right?" He couldn't be sure if the man would hurt them. If he really hurt them, even if it meant risking his life, he would do his best to protect Yu. However, Yu smiled and gently held Gong Fan's shoulder. He smiled weakly and said, "Gong Fan, he won't hurt us. Can't you see that he has been protecting us all this time?" Gong Fan was still in disbelief. He turned to look at the man, but he was puzzled. "Why are you protecting us?" The man didn't speak. Instead, he knelt in front of Yu on one knee and stroked his cheek gently with his large palm. Yu seemed to know what he was going to do and grabbed his wrist. "No!" The man was slightly stunned. "Can't we live together?" He paused after every word, as if he was trying to persuade him to stay. When the man heard this, he came back to his senses and shook his head with a smile. "Why?" Yu didn't understand. "We can survive together. I'm willing to accept you. Gong Fan is also willing to accept you. My family is also willing to accept you." When the man heard this, his eyes flickered. Gong Fan also understood the man's intention and stopped him. "Don't do anything stupid." The man suddenly broke free from Yu's restraints and stabbed the sharp end of the dagger into his heart. He was so ruthless that the dagger sank into his chest. The man groaned in pain and fell to the ground. He leaned against the wall, but he closed his eyes peacefully, as if waiting for death to come. Yu's heart trembled violently and tears flowed out of his eyes. He pushed Gong Fan away and crawled to the man's side. He held his shoulders and asked in a trembling voice, "Why? Why did you do this?" The man opened his eyes and looked at him seriously. He gently covered the back of his hand with his bloody hand. His thin lips parted slightly and he finally spoke in a hoarse voice. "You are the proof that I'm alive. You are the proof that I'm alive." Chapter 4386. After the man finished speaking, he calmly closed his eyes. His body, like the young man and the girl, gradually turned transparent. Gong Fan knew that this was a sign that he was about to disappear. It was as if the disappearance of all his personalities would turn into stars and eventually drift into the distance. He wanted to reach out and hold the man's hand, but he grabbed nothing. Yu looked at all of this with a numb expression. Suddenly, he understood everything. In ancient times, there was a Mencius who once said, "Man is born good." However, Sun Zi believed that man's life was in heaven. Without heaven and earth, evil is born? Heaven and earth. All things are born in harmony and nurtured in their own way. Once the heavenly duty is established and the heavenly merit is achieved, the form is formed and the spirit is born. Since man was born from heaven, human feelings were also born from heaven's feelings. Human feelings that were born from heaven's feelings were called nature. Therefore, Sun Zi said, nature is born for a reason. Nature is born naturally. Nature is born naturally. Nature is born naturally. Love is the nature of nature. In other words, Sun Zi believed that man was born evil. As he grew older and was educated with morals, he would abandon his initial evil and selfish side. And this girl and young man represented his initial evil intentions. And this man was the reaper formed in his subconscious. He disregarded all dangers and secretly protected him. Moreover, he fought with the young man to the death in order to wipe out the last remaining personality that represented evil in his body. What was left was a kind personality. And the reason why he chose to disappear was because his hands were also stained with blood. He did not want to stay and tarnish Yu's soul. He chose to disappear with all the evil, leaving behind the purest land. Yu Yu watched helplessly as the man turned into specks of light and drifted out of the window with the wind blowing in from the window. He was right. Yu Yu thought that the fact that he was alive and well was proof of his existence. Everything had come to an end. Alice stayed by the bed, but when she saw Yu Yu lying on the bed, she suddenly choked with sobs. She moved closer to him. Just as she was puzzled, she saw another tear roll down from the corner of his eye. What happened? She couldn't help but worry. Why are you crying? Alice picked up the handkerchief and wanted to wipe away his tears. Just as she wiped them away, the tears fell down again. She was caught off guard. Alice's heart ached over and over again. She tirelessly wiped his tears and gently held his hand. She wanted to pass all her courage and strength to him through the palm of her hand. What happened? Romanka was not as attentive as her. Seeing that she was wiping away Yu Yu's tears, she also sat up straight. Alice shook her head blankly. I don't know what happened. He seems to be crying. Crying. Romanka walked softly to the bedside and looked at Yu Yu worriedly. However, she saw that his expression was unprecedentedly calm. I'm so worried. I'm so afraid that there will be an accident. If it was possible, Alice was willing to enter that world. She did not want Yu Yu and Gong Fan to face it alone. But she could not. She could only stay by the bed and watch helplessly. There was nothing she could do. I believe that everything will be fine. Chapter 4387. The world gradually calmed down. Gong Fan leaned against the window and looked at the stars that gradually drifted into the distance. Then he could no longer see them, but his heart was unprecedentedly calm. Everything is over. Then, Gong Fan turned his head and was puzzled. What about us? What should we do? Help me. Yu Yu stretched out his hand. Gong Fan smiled and reached out his hand. The two of them held each other's hands tightly. He pulled him up. Yu Yu's legs went soft and he almost fell again. Gong Fan immediately supported him steadily. Be careful. Yu Yu finally steadied himself. He looked up and met his eyes. Gong Fan also looked at him calmly. Are you afraid? What are you afraid of? Gong Fan smiled and did not think much of it. What's there to be afraid of when I'm with you? Gong Fan, come with me. Yu Yu opened his arms and smiled gently. Become one with me. We'll never be separated again. Gong Fan suddenly felt a lump in his throat. Yu Yu. How does it feel to become one with you? Gong Fan laughed. Will I be able to see Mommy again? I don't know either. Yu Yu pursed his lips and said, Alice told me that the goal this time is to find you, get rid of all the negative personalities, and become one with you. This way, we won't be separated for the rest of our lives. We'll be together forever. Really? Are you willing? Gong Fan nodded solemnly. I'm willing. He also opened his arms and hugged Yu Yu tightly. The two little guys hugged each other tightly. Yu Yu closed his eyes quietly and said softly, Gong Fan, let's go home together. I miss Mommy, and I miss Daddy. Gong Fan sniffed and smiled. He hugged Yu Yu even tighter. Let's go home together. The two children hugged each other tightly. Gradually, their bodies became transparent. Yu Yu was surprised to find that Gong Fan's body was emitting spots of light. It was as if he was surrounded by the Milky Way. Could it be that he was going to disappear? Impossible. Gong Fan was not dead. It was impossible for him to disappear. Yu Yu hugged him even tighter. Gradually, Gong Fan's body became even more transparent. He slowly merged into Yu Yu's body. In a daze, Yu Yu saw Gong Fan's eyes filled with determination and conviction. Yu Yu, we promised that we would never separate. We agreed to go home together. These were the last words that Gong Fan said to Yu Yu. Yu Yu's bosom gradually became empty. Gong Fan turned into countless stars and revolved around him. For a moment, the world was dark. Gradually, the manor disappeared, and so did the forest. Yu Yu opened his eyes and could only see the barren darkness around him. There was only a patch of stars surrounding him. He gently opened his palm. A few stars fell on his palm, giving him a great sense of warmth. What a warm feeling. The stars surrounded him and finally flowed into his body bit by bit. It was as if countless warm currents were flowing into his body. Chapter 4388. Yu is awake. Early in the morning, Alice was like a happy bird as she passed on the good news. Yu is awake. Yun Shirshir opened the door and saw Alice standing at the doorway with tears in her eyes. She was touched and comforted. She looked at Yun Shirshir and stuck out her tongue. Tears rolled down her cheeks because of joy. Shirshir, Yu is awake. It was just a few words, but her tone was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Yun Shirshir could even hear the slight tremble in her voice. What do you mean by awake? Through the brain imaging, we found that his two personalities have merged together. All the memories of Gong Fan and Yu have been preserved and merged together. In other words, the two personalities of Yu and Gong Fan have merged together perfectly. As Alice spoke, she finally relaxed her brows. Yu has returned to the way he was in the past. Shirshir, I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Because of the matter between Yu and Gong Fan, she did not dare to face Yun Shirshir and felt very guilty. After all, she could not erase her responsibility for causing the child to become like this. However, now that Yu and Gong Fan had merged together and returned to the past, this was an outcome that everyone was happy to see. The old Yu has returned. Yun Shirshir, who had been in a daze for a long time, finally woke up because of this sentence. Where is he now? He is still in the hospital bed in the laboratory. As he has just finished the brain imaging, he is a little sleepy. I asked him to eat something before resting. Yun Shirshir could not hide her excitement. Can I go and see him now? Of course. As soon as she finished speaking, Alice saw Yun Shirshir running towards the dining room. Yu. His heart was filled with these two burning words. Yu had finally returned to the past, while Gong Fan remained in his body forever. She had not lost a single one. Yun Shirshir was crying tears of joy as she ran. After being in fear for so long, she was even prepared to lose Gong Fan. She flew all the way here in fear. She was worried that this would be the last time she would see Gong Fan. Unexpectedly, Yu and Gong Fan were safe and sound. At this moment, the excitement in her heart was indescribable. Yun Shirshir ran without a care for her own safety. She ran through the long corridor and rushed into the laboratory. When she reached the door, her footsteps slowed down. Strangely, after running for so long and so fast, he didn't feel tired at all. Yun Shirshir stood at the door and looked at Yu, who was lying on the bed, looking weak but calmly eating porridge. Her tears fell uncontrollably again. This was the joy of regaining what he had lost, as well as guilt, joy, and all sorts of other complex emotions. Her lips trembled. She resisted the urge to cry and walked to Yu's bedside. Yu's hand that was eating porridge paused. He looked up and saw that it was Yun Shirshir. At first, he was shocked. Then, he revealed that unfamiliar long-lost, but incomparably familiar doting smile. Good morning, Mommy. It was a simple greeting, but it was warm. Although Yu and Gong Fan had always been around, ever since the two personalities separated, Yu was no longer the original him. The Yu of the past had a warm smile that was full of doting. Chapter 4389. In this smile, Yun Shirshir vaguely saw Yu and Gong Fan again. They had returned to the past. Yun Shirshir covered her mouth and cried tears of joy. Boo-hoo! She let out a whimper. Seeing her like this, Yu held his forehead helplessly. Mommy, why are you crying? Aren't I fine? Even though he said that, his eyes had unknowingly turned completely red. His lips were trembling badly as if he was trying his best to hold something back. Yu tried his best to smile, but when the corners of his lips curled up, it looked like he was crying. Yun Shirshir couldn't hold it in anymore. She pounced on the bed and hugged him tightly. Yu, Mommy missed you so much. Mommy missed you so much. She thought that she would never see Gong Fan again. She didn't expect. At that moment, there were too many emotions in her heart. Yu hugged her too, and gently stroked the back of her head. Even though he was still a teenager, his actions exuded a mature aura. Okay, don't cry, okay? Mommy, I'm sorry to have made you worry. Yu gently patted her face. Then, he gently held her face. Looking at the stream of tears on her face, his heart ached. He lowered his eyelashes, leaned closer to her, and gently kissed away the tears on her face. The intimacy between a mother and son was natural. No one could surpass the bond between her and Yu Yu. This had nothing to do with favoritism. During her most difficult time, she and Yu Yu depended on each other. The two of them were each other's strongest support and reliance. This bond was something that even Gong Jie couldn't surpass. The others also arrived one after another. Mu Yaja and Xiao Yichen were the first to arrive, followed by Gong Jie and Hua Jin. When Xiao Yichen saw Yun Shishir and Yu Yu hugging each other tightly, he was deeply touched. It wasn't envy or jealousy, but an inexplicable sadness in his heart. If he really wanted to say that he was envious, he was probably envious of this bond. Xiao Yichen was also affected by their emotions. His eyes reddened as he held Mu Yaja's hand tightly. Mu Yaja sensed the change in his emotions. He lowered his head and glanced at him, only to see him staring in the direction of Yun Shishir and Xiao Yichen. The man smiled and put his arm around Xiao Yichen's shoulders, patting him gently. "Aren't you going to hug mommy and brother?" His reminder also seemed like encouragement. Originally, Xiao Yichen felt extremely guilty because he had doubted Yu Yu and Gong Fan previously. Now, he looked at them and felt touched, but he didn't dare to go forward for fear of being ostracized by Yu Yu. Mu Yaja obviously knew what he was thinking. When they were at the hospital, Xiao Yichen thought that Gong Fan had stabbed his mommy. He was extremely agitated and even said a lot of outrageous things. He was extremely upset. He shouldn't have doubted his brother. Because of this, he felt very regretful and didn't dare to take that step no matter what. After Mu Yaja's encouragement, he finally mustered up his courage. He clenched his fists and walked to Yu Yu's bed. "Yu Yu!" He called his name in a deep voice. Yu Yu heard his voice and turned around. When he saw that it was Xiao Yichen, he couldn't help but smile. "Brother," her soft brother, made little Yichen feel as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. Chapter 4390. Amused, Yu Yu tugged at his hand. Of all people, this was a sore spot. "No way. Are you crying?" "No." Xiao Yichen stubbornly denied it, but everyone could hear the hoarseness in his voice as he choked on his sobs. In front of Yu Yu, as an older brother, he still had some dignity and did not cry easily. Now that his eyes were red, naturally, he did not want Yu Yu to see it. Yu Yu did not stand on ceremony and gently tugged at Xiao Yichen's sleeve again. "Hey, brother." Xiao Yichen called him brother again. This time, it hit the weakest spot in Xiao Yichen's heart. "Brother, I missed you. How about you? Did you miss me?" Xiao Yichen lowered his head and laughed. "I missed you." Then, Yu Yu was full of anticipation. "Aren't you going to hug me?" Xiao Yichen turned around and finally looked at him. Yu Yu looked at his red eyes and said angrily, "Why are you crying? I'm not missing an arm or a leg. Aren't I fine?" Xiao Yichen could no longer hold back and hugged Xiao Yichen tightly. Yun Shishir looked at them with gratification. The reunion of the two brothers caused everyone present to sigh with emotion. Gong Jie, too, was deeply affected by this. Feeling touched, he stepped forward and was about to reach out to hug the two brothers when Yu Yu raised his head, only to be met with a familiar cold face. "Go away." Gong Jie's touched expression froze. The touched feeling in his heart was immediately replaced by embarrassment. Gong Jie was furious. He had been so touched by the touching brotherly love just now. In the end, with just one sentence from Yu Yu, he was struck by lightning. "Hey!" Gong Jie's face was full of resentment. "Can't I hug you even if I want to?" He even said that he was touched. What a heartless guy. "No, go away." Gong Jie became even more suspicious. "When did uncle offend you? Do you have to target me like this?" "Puchi." "Xiao Jie, did you do something to offend Yu Yu or Gong Fan? Otherwise, why would he be so against you?" Hearing Yun Shishir's question, Gong Jie really thought about it carefully, but he couldn't figure out how he had offended this little nephew. He shook his head blankly. Hua Jin said, "Looks like you must have offended Yu Yu by accident. Otherwise, why would she target you and no one else?" Gong Jie said angrily, "You heartless bastard. Why don't you think about it? Uncle has worked so hard to support your little lover." Little lover. Everyone turned pale with fright. These words were undoubtedly like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. Alice had just arrived with Natalia. Hearing that, she was caught unprepared and burst into laughter. "Ha ha! Yu Yu's face instantly turned red when he heard this. What are you talking about? Yun Shesher's interest was piqued. Little lover? What little lover? Gong Jie obviously didn't know that Alice had arrived with Natalia. He said in all seriousness, Sis, you don't know. Back then, it was this good son of yours who cried and begged me to adopt Natalia. Even a ghost could tell that this guy was up to no good. Yun Shesher heard this and opened her mouth in surprise. No way. Yu Yu is still so young. How can he know all this? How can he have his first awakening of love so early? Children these days are all mature early. Yu Yu retorted unhappily, When did I cry and beg? Who was the one who cried and begged me to adopt her? Chapter 4391. Still trying to deny it? Gong Jie snorted coldly. Uncle worked so hard to raise your childhood sweetheart, but you don't appreciate it at all. You even dissed Uncle. Where's your conscience? Yu Yu immediately explained to Yun Shesher. I just felt that Natalia was staying in such a cold and empty hospital, so I felt sorry for her and wanted to help her find a home. Uncle, you're thinking about things you shouldn't be thinking about. Damn pervert. Gong Jie was furious. Who are you calling a damn pervert? Yu Yu rolled his eyes arrogantly. I'm talking about you. Damn pervert. You, Gong Jie pushed Yun Shesher and Xiao Yichen away and rolled up his sleeves. Fine, fine. Yu Yu, we're not done. With that said, Gong Jie angrily reached out to pull Yu Yu's face. Yu Yu's face was very delicate and couldn't withstand his pulling. His face was twisted out of shape by the pulling. Xiao Yichen held back his laughter and pretended to persuade Yu Yu. Uncle, don't bully Yu Yu. Be careful not to damage his face. I'll take responsibility if it damages his face. Yu Yu didn't cry out in pain. He stretched out his hand and wanted to pull Gong Jie's face back. However, Gong Jie's hand was much longer than his. It was easy for him to pull Yu Yu's face, but Yu Yu couldn't grab his face. Yu Yu was flustered and exasperated. Gong Jie. The little guy was so angry that he called out his name. One could imagine how angry he was. Gong Jie was even more amused. He didn't intend to let go. Who told you to call me a damn pervert? I'll give you a chance. Call me uncle and I'll let you go. In your dreams. Humph, then I won't hold back. With that said, Gong Jie exerted more force. Ha ha ha. Everyone was tickled by this. Even Natalia couldn't help but laugh at this scene. Yu Yu had sharp ears and immediately heard her laugh. She turned to look at her and was caught off guard when she saw that she had also come. Let go. He glared fiercely at Gong Jie, as if warning him. Gong Jie also heard that Natalia was coming and immediately sent her away. The uncle and nephew looked at the main character awkwardly. All right, stop messing around. Yun Shesher advised from the side and clapped her hands. Today is a day worth celebrating. Why don't we think of a way to celebrate? When Gong Jie heard Yun Shesher's words, he also felt that it was a good idea. Uncle, how do you plan to celebrate? Why don't we have a barbecue at the beach? Gong Jie has a collection of rare and precious wines in his wine cellar. Let's take them out today and have a taste. Gong Jie's face was full of regret after being betrayed by Alice. No. Those wines are all antiques. No way. Antiques. Mu Yaja's interest was piqued and he glanced at his brother-in-law. Alice immediately reminded him. It said that he has a bottle of sherry wine from 1775. This wine is very rare and priceless in today's market. Some people will sell it at high prices, but it's all fake. Xiao Jie's bottle of sherry wine, however, is the real deal. When he brought it back, the fragrance was unique. Mu Yaja was in high spirits. Looks like we're in for a treat today. Gong Jie snorted coldly. Don't even think about it. This wine is for me to taste in the future. Don't even think about coveting it. Yun Shesher felt wronged and said, Sherry wine from 1775. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it before. Xiao Jie, why don't you take it out and let me see it? Gong Jie was speechless. Chapter 4392. Gong Jie said fiercely, If you want to loot my wine cellar, you'll have to do it over my dead body. 2 hours later. It was dusk by the beach and the waves were rolling. There was barbecue and champagne on the table. On the other side of the table were the hidden wines that Yun Shirshir and Mu Yaja had looted from Gong Jie's wine cellar. Gong Jie sat weakly on the beach chair as if he was paralyzed. His eyes were empty and he looked as if he had nothing left to live for. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen looked at him with heartache, but they didn't know how to comfort him. Yu Yu sighed. So pitiful. Xiao Yichen nodded. Yes, very pitiful. If I hadn't heard from Alice, I wouldn't have known that uncle was so rich. Sherry wine from 1775. Pop! Mu Yaja opened the cork of the sherry wine. The captivating aroma was carried by the sea breeze to Gong Jie. Gong Jie turned his head and looked at the sherry wine that he had hidden for so long in Mu Yaja's hand. His heart ached so much that he almost couldn't breathe. My sherry. Men don't cry easily. However, at this moment, Gong Jie couldn't help but tear up. He had never been in a relationship before, so he didn't know what it felt like to be heartbroken. It was probably as painful as he was now. He was heartbroken. Here comes the main event. Alice held the wine glass and happily went over to Mu Yaja. She poured half a glass of wine, but she couldn't bear to drink it. If she drank it, it would cost more than tens of thousands of US dollars. This sherry wine was Gong Jie's heart, Gong Jie's liver, and Gong Jie's spleen, lungs, and kidneys. At the thought of this, Alice was strangely excited. It was very difficult for her to take advantage of Gong Jie. Alice walked up to Gong Jie. Seeing that he was still gloomy, she raised her eyebrows as if to provoke him. Xiao Jie, aren't you going to have a drink? There were a total of 2 bottles of sherry wine, but with so many people, each person only had 1 glass, and 1 bottle was soon empty. Gong Jie glared at her. Are you very pleased with yourself? To be able to taste Shirley wine while I'm still alive, of course I'm proud. Alice raised her goblet and smiled obnoxiously. There's an old saying, enjoy life to the fullest. What a great saying. Enjoy life to the fullest. Gong Jie gritted his teeth and stood up from the recliner. Everyone was drinking. Wouldn't it be a pity if he didn't drink after saving him? No way. He wanted to drink, and he had to fight for it. This was his wine, and he had to drink it sooner or later. If he drank too much, he would end up in his stomach, lest others covet it. After thinking it through, Gong Jie walked to Mu Yaja's side. However, he saw that Hua Jin was also leaning against him, holding a goblet. After drinking 2 glasses, he felt that the wine was too delicious, so he came over for a 3rd glass. The 2nd bottle of sherry wine was opened, and half of it was already gone. Gong Jie was furious when he saw this. Feeling that there was something scary behind him, Hua Jin turned around, only to see Gong Jie glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey. He burped in fright. Who allowed you to drink so much? Gong Jie vented his anger on him. Hua Jin pouted, feeling wronged. I didn't drink that much. Even if it was the 3rd glass, half a glass, it wouldn't be much. Gong Jie's eyes looked as if they were about to spit fire. Enough is enough, all of you. Ha ha ha. Yun Shirshir looked at Gong Jie's distressed expression and for some reason, she was amused. Chapter 4393. Gong Jie got even angrier. Is it that funny? Xiao Jie, is this wine your lifeline? Yun Shirshir asked with a pout. Gong Jie said matter-of-factly. Of course. This wine is my lifeline. So you're saying that this wine is more important than me? Yun Shirshir was so cunning that she had completely forgotten about him. Gong Jie disagreed. How is that possible? Of course you're more important. Then I want you to share this wine with everyone. You've already drunk it, yet you're still pulling a long face. If you don't drink to your heart's content, won't it lose its value? Gong Jie was speechless. She made so much sense that he couldn't refute her. That's enough. Yun Shirshir walked over and patted his shoulder gently. She handed him the wine glass. Drink. It's rare that we're so happy today. It's a day worth celebrating. Don't look so sad, okay? For Yun Shirshir's sake, Gong Jie's anger dissipated quickly. He took the wine glass silently and took a sip. Hua Jin, who was beside him, immediately moved away from him, trembling in fear. No matter what, he had to stay away from this demon king. Mommy, I want to drink too. Xiao Yichen suddenly ran over. He held the wine glass and stared at the Shirley wine. Yun Shirshir said, No, children can't drink. It's just red wine. It doesn't matter. Besides, every bottle of Shirley wine I drink is one less bottle. When I grow up, I won't even have the chance to drink it. That was heart-wrenching. This sentence undoubtedly dealt another heavy blow to Gong Jia. That's right. The more he drank, the less he would drink because it was limited. He wouldn't have the chance to drink it again in the future. Yun Shishir couldn't persuade Xiao Yichen and could only pour half a glass for him. Seeing that Xiao Yichen was drinking, Yu craved the wine as well. She brought the wine glass to Yun Shishir and asked for half a glass. Cheers! Cheers! Ding! Ding sounds were heard. Several people raised their goblets and toasted. Yun Shishir walked up to Gong Jia and winked mischievously. Come, Xiao Jia. Cheers. For some reason, when he saw Yun Shishir's gentle smile, the haze in his heart was instantly swept away. He gladly raised his goblet and clinked it with hers. Cheers. I'll do it. You can do whatever you want. Yun Shishir seemed to be in high spirits, so she drank all the wine in the cup in one go. With a smile on his lips, Gong Jia downed the wine in his glass in one gulp. One must enjoy life to the fullest. Cherishing every day, cherishing every moment, this was the profound meaning of happiness. Gong Jia raised his wine glass and looked at the moon in the sky through the transparent crystal glass. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his gaze became blurry. It was as if his soul had been drawn away. The sea breeze blew gently, making one feel comfortable. Yun Shishir was soon half drunk. Alice, Hua Jin, and Natalia surrounded the barbecue and spared no effort in grilling scallops. Hua Jin didn't have much experience, but Alice had always been by the sea. Thus, she had many tricks for grilling scallops and oysters. After a while, an enticing aroma filled the air with the sea breeze. It smells so good. A few gluttonous people walked over when they smelled the aroma. Alice placed the grilled scallops and oysters on a plate and sprinkled some seasoning. It was comparable to a barbecue feast at a 5-star restaurant. Those who don't know better would think that you're a 5-star chef, Hua Jin said quietly. Chapter 4394. When Alice heard this, she did not think much of it. Why? The chefs on the island roast better than me. I learned it secretly. The seaside is so nice. Hua Jin sighed from the bottom of his heart. Alice was a little surprised when she heard this. Why do you suddenly have such a sigh? Because the seaside is so beautiful. Don't you think so? During the day, you can swim and dive in the sea. At night, you can sit quietly by the sea, enjoy the sea breeze and eat seafood. It's the most comfortable feeling in life. Shallow. Alice gave a pertinent evaluation. Why do you say that? Living by the sea actually has many advantages. For example, the sea view is very beautiful. There is very little noise by the sea. You can swim every day. There are many minerals in the sea that can improve your skin and improve your physical fitness. The air is also very fresh. However, the sea breeze always carries a fishy smell. In addition, there are many problems with humidity by the sea. For example, clothes are always easy to get wet. The railings of the doors and windows are easy to corrode. Moreover, it's easy to get rheumatism. If you encounter a typhoon or a tsunami, living by the sea is simply a disaster. Hua Jin was slightly stunned. He seemed to have really not thought of these problems. So, there are many sides to every problem. Life is never perfect. It is always accompanied by all kinds of regrets. Yes. However, there are happiness and regrets. This is life. Perfect. Don't you feel that it's boring? Alice raised her wine glass and gently swirled the wine in the glass with a deep smile. Life is to experience all kinds of ups and downs. This is the greatest meaning of life. However, this is what I think. Everyone's values are different. Perhaps others will not agree. I think I will agree with your view. Hua Jin pursed his lips and smiled. There is absolutely no perfection in life. There is no doubt about this. If a person's life is too smooth, that would be unbelievable. Grasp every regret and cherish every happiness. Well said. Hua Jin raised his wine glass. To your chicken soup for the soul. Cheers. Alice drank the wine in one gulp. Yu suddenly muttered, What are you guys talking about? The scallops are about to win. Alice looked at her own barbecue grill. Sure enough, the scallop meat was trembling and making a slightly charred sound. Haha, this is also one of the regrets of my life. Hua Jin put the burnt scallop aside. A burnt scallop is an imperfection in life. Alice smiled knowingly. Not far away, Gong Jie was lying on a recliner, watching this harmonious scene, especially when he saw Hua Jin and Alice talking and laughing. He didn't know why, but he felt a little irritated. The two of them seemed to be getting along quite well. Could it be that Hua Jin was interested in Alice? Thinking of this possibility, Gong Jie felt a strange sense of crisis. Even he himself did not understand why he had such an inexplicable feeling. At night, after the party was over, Hua Jin walked back to his room. In the corridor, he unexpectedly bumped into Gong Jie. He leaned against the door of his room with his arms crossed, as if waiting for someone. Hua Jin couldn't help but feel strange. It's so late. Why aren't you going back to your room to rest? Chapter 4395. It can't be? You're drunk? Hua Jin sniffed and looked up, but his eyes met with Gong Jie's deep gaze. He got a shock and deliberately distanced himself from Gong Jie. Gong Jie couldn't help but tease him. Am I so scary that you want to keep your distance from me? Drunk people like to find fault with him. Of course, he had to keep his distance. Besides, Gong Jie was so violent. What if he got drunk and lost control and beat him up? Hua Jin looked at him anxiously. Calm down. How am I not calm down? Then, since you're drunk, you should go back to your room and rest. How can you tell that I'm drunk? I can tell from how much you talk. However, Hua Jin only dared to say that in his heart. If he said that in front of Gong Jie, wouldn't he be courting death? You like Alice? Gong Jie's sudden question made Hua Jin stunned. What? Alice is such a scary woman. In the room, Alice had just finished bathing. She came out in a bathrobe and sneezed loudly. Who's talking bad about me? She muttered to herself as she walked towards the bed. What's scary? Do you know what her biggest interest is? Hua Jin's curiosity was piqued at once. What is it? Dissection. She especially likes to study the human body structure. She has dissected countless corpses. When she used to eat steak, she dissected it with a scalpel. Wretch. Hua Jin couldn't take it anymore and almost vomited. I'm not interested in Alice. Gong Jie raised an eyebrow and looked at her from the corner of his eyes. Then why did you chat with her for so long? He knew it now. This Gong Jie must be secretly in love with Alice. So, seeing that Alice chatted with him for so long, he was a little jealous. At this moment, they wouldn't come to denounce him, would they? Don't worry, I won't fight with you. Hua Jin promised him solemnly. This time, it was Gong Jie's turn to be confused. What did he mean by that? Not competing with him? Snatch what? Don't worry, I will keep a distance from Alice in the future. Hua Jin gave another guarantee. When Gong Jie heard this, he felt satisfied. Rest early. After Gong Jie finished speaking, he leisurely went back. Hua Jin looked at Gong Jie's departing back with a face full of question marks. He was suddenly at a loss. What a weirdo. Hua Jin entered the room and recalled Gong Jie's unfathomable expression. The more he thought about it, the stranger he felt. After recuperating at sea for a few days, Yun Shirshir's wound healed very quickly. She told Mu Yaja that she wanted to stay on the island for a few more days. Coincidentally, Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen also wanted to stay on the island for a few more days. However, there were still many matters piled up in the Shengyu Financial Group waiting for him to deal with. Hence, Mu Yaja chartered a plane to return to the country first. His time on the island was equivalent to a vacation. Yun Shirshir knew that Gong Xiaoying was also on this island. However, perhaps he was worried about her, or perhaps he was afraid that Yun Shirshir would not want to face him, so he did not appear in front of her. Yun Shirshir knew in her heart that Gong Xiaoying was avoiding her. However, she also understood that he was avoiding her for her sake. He did not want to embarrass her. On this day, Yun Shirshir suddenly said to Gong Jie, I want to see him. Him. Chapter 4396. Why do you want to see father all of a sudden? Gong Jie was pleasantly surprised. He held Yun Shirshir's shoulders in disbelief and asked, Have you decided to forgive father? Yun Shirshir did not answer. Instead, she looked deeply at Gong Jie. The relationship between him and me is very complicated. However, I had secretly promised that if Yu was safe and sound, I would choose to let go of everything and not bear any grudges. Now that Yu is really safe and sound, perhaps even God is guiding me to forgive him. You, Gongjie was comforted and asked, don't you hate him anymore? Of course I do. How can I not hate him? As Yun Shirshir spoke, she sighed and turned to look at the boundless sea. She smiled and said, I admit that I was too vicious in the past. At that time, I blamed all my misfortunes on him. Actually, she understood. All the fortune and misfortune in her life had been caused by that man. It was because of him that she had become an orphan. However, it was also because of him that she had become entangled with the Mu family. Everything that had happened after that, including the entanglement between her and Mu Yaja, was also because of him. However, all the misfortunes had made her hate him. However, she had not been grateful to him for all the good things that had happened. She wanted to punish him with such unfairness. However, in reality, they were the ones to be punished in the end. There was no winner or loser between the two of them. She had decided to let go of all her grudges. It could be considered as doing it for her family. It was not good to be too vicious in her body and in her heart. Mu Yaja was also aware of her decision. She had already told him in advance and asked for his opinion. What opinion could Mu Yaja have? After all, Gong Xiaoying was her father, her biological father. Blood was thicker than water. There were some things that could not be severed in this lifetime. Mu Yaja still had some opinions about this father-in-law of his. His own son had been cheated by his grandfather, and he had been cheated so miserably. As a son-in-law, no matter how much he tolerated it, he still had a sense of propriety. However, when Yun Shirshir told him that she had decided to forgive Gong Xiaoying and asked for his opinion, Mu Yaja said, "This is a grudge between you and your father. It's not appropriate for me to get involved. However, no matter what decision you make, I will support you." Therefore, Mu Yaja left Dark Wind Island in advance and returned to the country. He wanted to leave Yun Shirshir and Gong Xiaoying behind to deal with this matter. Gong Jie said, "If you really want to see him, I can arrange it for you right away." "There's no need for that. Where is he? I'll go see him." Gong Jie was very surprised by her initiative and nodded his head as well. He made a phone call. "Jed, where is my father now?" Zephyr Island is huge. On the huge island, many corners were filled with cameras. Jed was the designer in charge of security. No matter who the culprit was, as long as he called him, he would be able to find them immediately. "Master is in the castle." He reported Gong Xiaoying's location and did not ask too much. Gong Xiaoying brought Yun Shirshir to the castle. After entering the castle, Gong Jie first brought Yun Shirshir to the living room. Then, he went to the study on the third floor to look for Gong Xiaoying. In the study, Gong Xiaoying was staring at the photo on the table in a daze. In the photo was a family photo of Yun Shirshir and Mu Yaja. Gong Jie was also in the photo, and even Hua Jin was in it. However, he was not in it. This family photo was brought back by Gong Jie. Chapter 4397. He specially printed an extra photo and gave it to Gong Xiaoying. From then on, this photo replaced Mu Qingqing's photo in a photo frame and was placed on the desk. This was a place where he often saw it. Every time he felt tired, he would hold the photo and look at it for a while. His fingers caressed Yun Shirshir's face, Yu Yu's face, Xiao Yichen's face, Yue Yao's face. This was a concern that he could not let go of no matter what. Other than that, he did not have any other thoughts. Originally, he was very obsessed with acknowledging Yun Shirshir. He wanted to acknowledge her as father and daughter. Even if he had to resort to unscrupulous means, he would not give up until he achieved his goal. However, when he saw the series of pain that his decision had brought to Yun Shirshir, it was impossible for him not to be upset. He realized how selfish his thoughts were. It was because of his selfishness that Mu Qingqing did not pick him up at the last moment. It was because of his selfishness that the daughter he cared about the most, who had been homeless for so many years, he had repeatedly hurt her because of his ignorance. He finally figured it out. Acknowledging her as father was not worth mentioning compared to his daughter living a good and happy life. Therefore, Gong Xiaoying did not ask for anything. As long as Yun Shirshir could live a good and peaceful life, he did not ask for anything else. He did not expect to be forgiven. Although if Yun Shirshir would never forgive him for the rest of her life, perhaps this would become a heavier regret than Mu Qingqing. However, this was his own doing, and he could not blame others. Even if Yun Shirsher really did not forgive him, it was only right. He did not force anything. He was staring at the family photo in a daze when a voice suddenly came from beside him. "Father!" Gong Jie's sudden voice startled him. Gong Xiaoying looked up in surprise. When he saw Gong Jie pushing the door open and walking in, he immediately became serious. "Why did you come in without knocking?" Gong Jie said confidently. "I knocked on the door." "Are you deaf?" Gong Xiaoying was speechless. This kid was really becoming more and more impudent. In the past, she had always been well behaved in front of him. Gong Xiaoying awkwardly put the family portrait back to its original position. He cleared his throat and asked, "Your sister, did she leave?" "No." "Oh? How long does she intend to stay on the island?" When Gong Jie heard this, he was a little suspicious. "Father, are you chasing her away?" Cough. Gong Xiaoying glared at him awkwardly. "Why would I chase her away? It doesn't matter how long she stays on the island. He could afford to raise her for the rest of her life. He could even support the Shengyu financial group behind Mu Yaja, let alone Yun Shirsher." Gong Xiaoying pretended not to care and said, "If she likes it here, then let her stay for a while. The scenery here is good. It's not bad as a vacation spot." Gong Xiaoying introduced the island as if he was introducing a vacation spot. He pretended to casually ask her to stay, which made Gong Jie not know whether to laugh or cry. At the same time, he felt a little sorry for her. Gong Xiaoying could not appear, but as a father, he definitely hoped that Yun Shirsher would stay on the island for a few more days. This feeling was like knowing that his daughter was on the island. Although he could not see her, he felt inexplicably at ease. After the age of 50, Gong Xiaoying had this feeling. Some people, once you met them, you would not see them again. Life was long and counting down. Chapter 4398. There were too many regrets in his life. As time passed, he cherished this little happiness even more. There was a sense of security because she was by his side. Even if he couldn't see her, it didn't matter. Gong Xiaoying couldn't show too much concern and could only ask Gong Jie indirectly. "Does she like this place? Is she used to living here? Sometimes the sea breeze is strong and the waves are strong. As a man, you should protect your sister well." Gong Xiaoying asked one question after another, all of which were details. When Gong Jie heard this, he actually had the urge to cry. Gong Xiaoying had never shown this side of him before. He carefully tried to find out news about her from him. He wanted to give her the best and wanted her to stay on the island for one more day. That kind of cautious feeling was as if he would feel annoyed if she didn't like the small details. He was a devoted father who wanted to give her the best from the bottom of his heart. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" "Ask her." Gong Xiaoying smiled helplessly. "She hates me so much. How can I appear in front of her? As a father, I'm not qualified. As her younger brother, you can't wrong her. Do you understand? Father, you don't have to give orders like an officer. If she doesn't forgive you, are you going to hide from her forever?" Gong Xiaoying was unhappy. "When did I hide from her? Otherwise, why didn't you see her when she was on the island for so long?" Gong Xiaoying was a little angry. "So what if I see her? At that time, she was worried about you and I didn't dare to disturb her. Moreover, the person she didn't want to see the most was me. What if I suddenly saw her and she ran away in anger? So you're like a coward, locking yourself in the study and secretly looking at the family photos." Gong Jie's words were not pleasant to the ears. Gong Xiaoying was unhappy because of this. "Your tone today is very problematic. What do you want to do? Provoke me? I'm just here to tell you." Gong Jie bent down and stared into his eyes. "If she wants to see you, will you see her?" Gong Xiaoying was stunned when he heard this. She wants to see me?" "Yes." When Gong Xiaoying heard this, he immediately disagreed. "How is that possible? Who are you trying to fool by saying this? Why would she want to see me? What good would it do me to lie to you?" Gong Jie shrugged innocently. "Besides, she's downstairs. You'll know whether I'm lying to you or not. Or are you afraid to go?" Gong Xiaoying was stunned. He asked in a roundabout way, "Why does she want to see me?" You have to ask yourself this question.
It's not good for me to interfere in the matters between you and your father.
After Gong Jie finished speaking, he raised his wrist and looked at his watch. She said she's willing to wait for you for 30 minutes. If you don't want to see her, she won't wait. Father, it's up to you. After saying this, Gong Jie walked away leisurely.
Gong Xiaoying glared at his back view and said angrily, "This little rascal. He has no respect for his elders."
Following this, Gong Xiaoying actually didn't have the confidence to tell her that Yun Shishir wanted to see him. He didn't know why she wanted to see him. Could it be that he had been discovered secretly watching her through the surveillance camera? Chapter 4399. Other than that, what else could it be? Gong Xiaoying couldn't think of anything. He didn't dare to meet her rashly. He didn't know why, but he was actually very afraid of this daughter. His glass heart really couldn't afford to be hurt. If they met again, she would mock and ridicule him, and then make it clear that they would never see each other again. Then where should he put the glass shards on the ground? But he couldn't accept not meeting her. At that time, Gong Jie would definitely mock him for being a coward. He thought it through. Gong Xiaoying decided to meet her. He changed his clothes and solemnly tidied up his appearance, as if he was going to an important negotiation. The next time they met, he must leave a good impression on his daughter. This was a father carefully trying to protect his dignity, and at the same time, he wanted to leave a perfect image in front of his beloved daughter. Even if he was prepared for the worst, he also hoped that in the worst-case scenario, he could leave a place in Yun Shishir's heart. Gong Xiaoying tidied himself up and went out, only to find that 30 minutes had passed. Gong Jie said that Yun Shishir was in the living room. He walked towards the living room with his walking stick, almost without grace. When he walked into the living room, he didn't find anyone there. Gong Xiaoying looked around, but didn't see anyone. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. 30 minutes had passed. That person had probably already left. She had given him 30 minutes of grace. He wasn't willing to wait for another minute. Gong Xiaoying was a little annoyed with himself for wasting so much time on his appearance. He couldn't help but feel a little depressed that she wasn't around. Gong Xiaoying sighed, turned around and was about to leave. But Yun Shishir's gentle voice suddenly came from behind him. "Since you're already here, why don't you sit for a while?" Gong Xiaoying's back stiffened. He turned around in surprise and saw Yun Shishir coming out of the bathroom. She was wiping her hands with a towel while looking at him calmly. Just now, the reason why he didn't see her at first glance was because she went to the bathroom to wash her hands. When she walked out, she saw that he was about to leave. She was a little surprised. "Just now. I didn't see you. I thought you had already left."
Facing her like this, he seemed a little embarrassed and nervous, so much so that his words were not as swift and decisive as before.
In the past, no matter who he faced, he always had a feeling of superiority. Even when facing her, it was the same. Knowing that she was still alive, when he went to see her, he wanted to give her the dignity and aura of a father. But that was just how people were. It was just that he had lost it once and did not know how to cherish it. Now, he didn't even care about Grace.
Just speaking carefully in front of her was enough to make her tremble with fear.
"Are you not going to sit? I brewed some tea, and it's getting cold now." Yun Shishir took the lead and sat down on the sofa. She had already brewed a pot of tea on the coffee table. There are many good teas on the island. I've never seen some of them before. Using this topic, Gong Xiaoying broke the deadlock. "Do you like black tea or green tea?" "Whether it's black tea or green tea, I don't refuse any. But compared to green tea, I prefer black tea. Especially in winter, when I brew a cup of Jun Mei and Chiman tea, I feel my body warming up." "I like black tea too. I heard from Xiao Jie that you actually like coffee the most." Chapter 4400. Yun Shishir said, "Like my mother, she loved coffee too. However, at that time, coffee was too expensive, so she would often brew flower tea to drink." Flower tea? Yeah. It was rare for Yun Shishir to talk about their childhood with Gong Xiaoying. "When I was young, I still remember the place where we lived. It was very small and simple. It was a typical old, run-down, and small neighborhood with only one bedroom and one living room. The place wasn't big. A monthly rent of 300 to 100 yuan was very expensive at that time. Although the living room and bedroom were very big, because there were 3 of us, My mother placed a small bed in the living room to train Xiao Jie's independence. My mother and I slept in the bedroom. The kitchen wasn't big and the bathroom was small. When I was young, I could only squeeze in the bathtub with Xiao Jie. When I was young, my health wasn't very good and I often caught colds from the cold. However, although the house was small, the garden that came with it was very big.
Garden.
Yun Shishir nodded. Yeah. I remember that when we first moved in, the garden was already abandoned. Although it's called a garden, it's actually just a flower bed surrounded by weeds and withered leaves. Mom was very satisfied when she saw the flower bed. Although 300 yuan is very expensive, she still bought it without hesitation. Gong Xiaoying said, "Your mother liked flowers and plants very much." Yeah, she was especially particular about them. After moving in, she spent a day tidying up the house and another day taking care of the flower bed. Oh! Following Yun Shishir's description, Gong Xiaoying's heart calmed down.
He couldn't help but imagine the layout of the house where the three of them rented and that small but warm little garden.
My mother was very tired every day. Because she had to take care of us, it was inconvenient for her to go to work at the factory. Moreover, at that time, the Mu family was looking for her everywhere, so she was afraid. Therefore, she hid at home, washing clothes, sewing clothes, and taking care of the children. Sometimes, she would take some odd jobs back home. At the mention of Mu Qingqing, many memories flew in Yun Shishir's mind. Those memories were like a revolving lantern, appearing in her mind scene by scene. Even after so many years, she still couldn't forget Mu Qingqing's voice and appearance. Her every frown and smile made her yearn for her very much. Gong Xiaoying asked, "What kind of odd jobs?" "The kind of assembly of small parts. She gets paid according to the number of parts she made. It cost 50 cents to make one. Every day, her mother would make 100. Although she could make 50 yuan a day, it was really tiring. It's really tiring." When Gong Xiaoying heard this, he frowned slightly and fell into deep thought. 50 yuan. At that time to him, it was probably just a dessert. However, Mom was very optimistic. She didn't make a fuss, no matter how tired she was. Sometimes, when she couldn't get any work, she would happily go to the back garden to take care of her flowers and plants. But most of the time, she liked to sit by the window and look out. But we really don't know what she's looking at. Later I found out. She was waiting for someone by the window. She was like a stubborn soldier. Even if she was wounded and exhausted, she still held her sword and held on to the last lonely city. Chapter 4401. I still remember that the neighborhood was quite messy. At that time, this small district was actually a slum area. There were also many workers who came to Shangjing to work. However, many drug addicts and people with criminal records lived there. When Mom came home from grocery shopping, people would often whistle at her. Every night, she would be afraid and lock the door several times. Sometimes, strangers would knock on the door in the dead of the night. Mom would be so scared that she would hide under the blanket and hug me, trembling. But little Jie is the only one who sleeps soundly every time. Gong Xiaoying listened carefully. He did not expect that Yun Shishir would be willing to tell him these things. However, these were exactly what he wanted to hear. He especially wanted to know how Mu Qingqing lived during that period of time. She must have had a hard time raising 2 children. Every time he thought of this, Gong Xiaoying's heart ached. However, what was the use of heartache? She had already passed away. Yun Shishir said, "I remember that there was a period of time when everyone in the neighborhood was in a state of panic. This was because a murder case was discovered in the neighborhood. A prostitute died in a rented apartment. It was said that she had recruited a customer who was a drug addict. When he entered her apartment, his drug addiction kicked in and he asked her for drugs. She did not do this business at all. So where would she get drugs from? That customer went crazy and killed her cruelly. The corpse was left in the rented apartment and no one cared about it. The prostitute also had a child who was only 3 years old at that time. The police analyzed that after 7 days, the neighbor smelled a stench and called the police. When they came, the woman was lying in the living room and the bedroom door was locked. Every time she did business, the woman would lock the child in a room. After 7 days, no one cared about the child and the child starved to death. These stories were unheard and unimaginable by people at Gong Xiaoying's level. At that time, many people said that the murderer was a psychopathic murderer who was out to take revenge on society, especially on women who lived alone with children. They bullied such people. Before the case was solved, the entire neighborhood was filled with rumors. Mom was especially afraid, so she asked someone to come over and change the windows and doors. It's very hard to raise 2 children alone without a man to take care of them. Gong Xiaoying paused, somewhat puzzled. Didn't your mother think about getting married? Get married. When Yun Shushu heard this, she couldn't help but smile as if she was mocking her. You should know mother better than I do. Get married? Yes, she didn't have to worry about marriage. No matter what, her beauty was there. Anyone who liked her, regardless of their status, would be bewitched by her beauty. But then, little Jia and I would have a stepfather. She doesn't want us to be wronged. She felt that she would definitely be able to wait for the man in her heart, and that man would definitely not let her down. I didn't let her down. Gong Xiaoying said dejectedly. I thought that she didn't want to go with me, so I was very disappointed. I didn't know that she was under house arrest. After that, she secretly gave birth to you and Xiao Jia. I only found out about this later. Yes. Yun Shushu's eyes reddened as she asked sadly. But didn't she send you a letter? Why? Why didn't you look for her immediately? Gong Xiaoying was speechless. Chapter 4402. That was a crucial move. She couldn't leave him. He thought that if he dragged it out, there would be no problem. It wouldn't be too late to pick up Mu Qingqing after he was done with the matter at hand. And that business became the cornerstone of the Hurricane Group's future. But because of a mistake, he lost the love of his life. He had always been confident, but he didn't expect that this decision would be the one he regretted the most in his life. He didn't go. You love the country, but you love the beauty even more. But between the beauty and the country, you chose the country. My mother, on the other hand, died without a status. Yun Shushu said with heartache. Even in her final despair, she was still calling your name. I heard it, but in the end, she didn't see you. Gong Xiaoying's lips trembled violently. Every time he thought of that scene, just imagining it made his heart ache and suffocate. I'm sorry. Gong Xiaoying felt extremely guilty. He couldn't remember how many times he had apologized. Looking at the photo, looking out of the window, looking at the sky, sometimes dreaming of him, or thinking of Mu Qingqing, he would feel guilty and apologize. But he couldn't remember how many times he had apologized. Yun Shushu was indifferent when she heard that. She shook her head gently. I'm not here to blame you. Moreover, you don't have to apologize to me. Fate is sometimes like dominoes. If there's a missing link in the middle, the outcome will be different. It's also because of you that I met my true love and had 3 cute children. But Dad, the person you should feel indebted to is not me, but Mom. Dad, Gong Xiaoying didn't react at first, but he was really sensitive to the word, Dad. When he heard this sentence, he was stunned. He raised his head in disbelief and looked at Yun Shushu. She looked at him calmly. There was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. It was relief, calmness, gentleness, and at the same time, a little mockery. I originally thought that I would never say this word to you in this lifetime. She paused and continued, not only did you hurt my mother, but you also hurt Yu and Gong Fan. You even hurt Xiao Yichen. Logically speaking, I shouldn't forgive you. I shouldn't forgive you in this lifetime. Gong Xiaoying gulped. The man who was originally in high spirits was now sitting in front of his daughter, but he did not dare to speak. He was afraid that if he said something wrong, she would be angry again. However, at this moment, he had too many doubts in his heart. This was nothing. She called him Daddy. Did this mean that she was willing to acknowledge him as her father? Gong Xiaoying was agitated, uneasy, speculating, and suspicious. There was a hint of caution in his eyes, which made Yun Shushu feel a little sad. Mother must really want me to acknowledge you. Sometimes in my dreams, I would dream of her. She stood in front of me, smiling, looking at her as if I saw myself. The reason why I have such a deep impression of her appearance is because I really look like her. Perhaps this is also a kind of inheritance. Back then, even in such a difficult environment, she hid for so long. For so long, she questioned whether she should give birth to Xiao Jie and me. It was all for the sake of passing on her life. Even if she's no longer around, she still hopes that Xiao Jie and I can be by your side. Chapter 4403. When Yu returned to Hurricane, I once made a wish in my heart. If he and Gong Fan could be well, I was willing to let go of all the grudges. She did not want to remember these grudges anymore. She was willing to let go of everything. God bless her. In the end, Yu and Gong Fan were safe and sound. Hence, she had to keep her promise. Yun Shirshir looked up, pursed her lips, and looked out of the window. Finally, her gaze slowly fell on Gong Xiaoying. She took a deep breath, and then, a gentle smile appeared on her face. Daddy. This one word almost certainly implied that she was willing to acknowledge him as her father. At that moment, Gong Xiaoying's rationality collapsed. He had thought that she would hate him for the rest of her life. But he had never thought that she would be willing to forgive him. Gong Xiaoying covered his face and let the tears wreak havoc in his heart. In an instant, he choked up like a child. He was very stingy with his tears. When he heard the news of Mu Qingqing's death, he rarely shed tears. At that time, he was still a little confused about the fact that Mu Qingqing had left him forever. He even vaguely felt that she was not dead and was just hiding from him. However, after a long time when he looked at her photo at a certain moment, the thought that she was really dead came to him. Finally, he could not take it anymore and cried once. This time, Yun Shirshir had completely let go of her hatred for him. He could not help but cry again. This was one of the few moments of tenderness in his life. An iron-blooded man, an all-powerful man who stood at the top of the world. At this moment, in front of his beloved daughter, he had completely broken down. Yun Shirshir could not help but be moved. She stood up, walked to his side, and gently patted his shoulder. Dad, don't cry. Shirshir, I'm really sorry. Yun Shirshir kept saying that he did not owe her anything. But did he really not owe her anything? Her words could not convince him at all. He owed her, and he owed her a lot. The sadness in his heart was about to overflow. Yun Shirshir knelt down and tried to wipe his tears away. But no matter how hard she tried, her own tears kept flowing. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As she wiped away his tears, she also wiped away her own tears. Dad, why are you crying? You're putting me in a difficult position. Are you really willing to acknowledge the Gong family? Gong Xiaoying was still extremely cautious and careful. He was afraid that her words were just empty words. What else? I've already said so. Do you still suspect that I'm unwilling to acknowledge the Gong family? No. Gong Xiaoying's heart ached as he hugged her tightly. Sure, let Daddy hug you. This sentence finally broke the last line of defense in Yun Shirshir's heart. She gently snuggled into Gong Xiaoying's arms. At this point, it also meant that the relationship between father and daughter had finally been reunited. Gong Jie stood at the door and pushed it open. He looked at the father and daughter who were hugging each other and choking with sobs. His eyes were filled with bitterness. He bit his lip as he looked at this scene, but he felt extremely gratified. He had a family again. Memories flew. It was as if the scenes from his childhood had appeared before his eyes. In the rented apartment, Mu Qingqing was meticulously preparing the hot pot. Chapter 4404. He and Yun Shirshir ran back to the kitchen and lay on the kitchen counter, drooling over the fresh beef. Mu Qingqing would urge them to wash their hands as she continued to prepare dinner with a smile. When the hot pot was ready and served to the table, the two little guys gobbled up the hot pot. They were not afraid of being scalded at all. As Mu Qingqing ate, she would suddenly stare at the empty table in a daze. The table in the rental house was a typical square table with the two little guys sitting on each side. Naturally, one side of the table would be empty. Mu Qingqing would often stand up, take out a set of cutlery, and place it on the table as if she had completed some kind of pious ritual. She had always wanted to have a family. The family she wanted was not a luxurious one. She only wanted a family of a few people, healthy and safe. Sometimes, Yun Shirshir would lie on the windowsill with her and stare in a certain direction without moving. She knew that her mother was waiting for someone. A man. And she knew that this man was her and Xiao Jie's father. But no matter how much she waited and hoped, she could not find him. Sometimes, Yun Shirshir would accompany her mother and wait by the window. Gradually, she would get sleepy and lie on her arm with her eyes closed, half asleep. In a daze, she saw her mother suddenly run out. Through the yellow afternoon window, she saw her mother throw herself into the arms of a man without a care for her own safety. The man was very tall with a pair of straight legs. He was dressed in a suit and leather shoes. His every movement gave people a sense of security. This was something that Yun Shirshir, who had been living a homeless life, had never dreamed of. She tried hard to raise her head to see the man's face, but just as she raised her head, she woke up. At that time, she was looking out of the window in a daze. She did not realize that the scene just now was just her hallucination. She could not help but feel a little disappointed. She turned around and saw that her mother was still sitting beside her. She held her chin and looked out of the window as if she could not get tired of looking. Yun Shirshir raised her head and looked at her mother. She pouted and said sadly, "I had a dream just now." What dream?" "I dreamt of a man standing outside the door. Then you pounced on him and the two of you hugged each other." She would never forget the look on her mother's face when she heard those words. She stared at her in astonishment, tears welling up in her widened eyes. Her heart ached so much that she pulled Yun Shirshir into her arms. Suddenly, she broke down and felt so sad that it was as if there was a fishbone stuck in her throat. "Mom, is the person you're waiting for Dad?" Yun Shirshir asked curiously, "When is he coming to pick us up?" Hearing this, Mu Qingqing couldn't hold back her tears. At that time, she vaguely realized it. This man, perhaps she would never be able to wait for him in this lifetime? All this time, she had deliberately ignored and never considered this problem. Now, it was once again placed in front of her. Would she never be able to wait for him? "I can't wait any longer," Mu Qingqing muttered to herself. She seemed to be comforting her, but at the same time, she seemed to be convincing herself. "I can't wait any longer. Mommy doesn't want to wait any longer." However, his prophecy came true. She really didn't get to see him. Gong Jie leaned against the door. Suddenly, his heart palpitated violently. Mother. He could not bear to recall every frown, every smile, every voice and every face. Chapter 4405. And he did not want to recall Mu Qingqing.
Because once he really missed her, he would realize that there were some things in the past that he really could not go back to.
Some people would never be there. He had been hypnotizing himself, deliberately not recalling the bits and pieces of the past. Until now, when he saw Gong Xiaoying and Yun Shirshir hugging each other and reconciling, he realized that the father and daughter had finally recognized each other. If his mother was still around, she would be greatly relieved to see this scene. However, if his mother was still around, Yun Shirshir would not have waited until now to reconcile with his father. Yun Shirshir had never minded the hurt that Gong Xiaoying had caused her. She understood that no one could doubt Gong Xiaoying's feelings for her. However, she could not forgive him because this man had made her mother wait for a lifetime. Gong Xiaoying also never dared to recall. Just like that, more than 20 years passed. In these 20 years, women had appeared by his side, but gradually, he realized that he did not need women anymore. Some people's positions were really irreplaceable. Gong Jie could not stand it anymore. Affected by such an atmosphere, he looked a little lost. He silently turned around and walked down the stairs as if he had lost all his strength. On the way back to the room, Hua Jin and Gong Jie bumped into each other. "Hey, Gong Jie!" However, halfway through his words, Hua Jin paused and did not speak again. He was shocked to find that there was a clear tear stain on Gong Jie's face. No matter how hard Gong Jie tried to hold it in, he could not stop his sad tears. Gong Xiaoying had been waiting for Yun Shirshir's forgiveness, but he did not have any expectations. Just like how Mu Qingqing did not have any expectations when she waited for him. However, more than 20 years later, Yun Shirshir finally forgave Gong Xiaoying. Her forgiveness also seemed to mean that Mu Qingqing had forgiven Gong Xiaoying. He finally realized that his mother had finally met the man in her heart that she had been thinking about all this time. For so many years, he had always had a vague feeling. That was, his mother was clearly still by his side and had not gone far away. Sometimes in his dreams, he could still clearly see his mother's voice and face. Perhaps he did not realize it in his heart, but he actually hated Gong Xiaoying. Now he should really let go of all this. What's wrong? Hua Jin was a little surprised by Gong Jie's soullessness and walked over. When Gong Jie saw him, he did not say a word as he gently clasped his hand on his shoulder. "Don't move." "What are you doing?" "Let me." "Lean." Gong Jie leaned his head weakly on Hua Jin's shoulder. His weight, almost all of his body's was almost all. SSS, to be. He chooses. At night, Gong Xiaoying was sleeping on the bed when he suddenly felt a little inexplicably uneasy. In a trance, He was half awake and half asleep. Although his mind was very clear, his consciousness had already entered the dream. In the dream, he clearly saw that he was standing in a very dilapidated neighborhood. This was a very backward residential area. Chapter 4406. Gong Xiaoying slowly walked around the neighborhood aimlessly. The sound of children playing could be heard from the neighborhood. It seemed to be noon.
He could vaguely hear the sound of cooking through the open windows of some houses.
Soon after, someone called the playful children home for lunch. Beneath his feet was a newly poured cement road. This road seemed to have been an ordinary mud road before, but after the city's construction, it was transformed into a cement road. However, it seemed to have been modified bit by bit. As a result, the road had a patch-like feel. Piece by piece, it gave a very shabby feeling. Suddenly, he walked to a residential area and stopped in his tracks. From his point of view, he could see a courtyard. It was a small courtyard, but it was neatly maintained. Green grass, wisteria, and beautiful Chinese roses decorated the originally dilapidated courtyard. He could not help but be attracted by the courtyard. He slowly walked a few steps closer, but he was unexpectedly bumped into by a few naughty children. The group of children obviously did not notice him, a foreigner, and did not have time to greet him. They chased after him and ran away. "Xiao Jia, wait for me!" A voice attracted his attention. He turned around and saw a delicate and pretty little girl running past him in a huff. In front of her, a little boy who was about her height was waiting for her. "Hurry up! You're running so fast. How can I keep up? You're running too slow. We just finished eating. Don't run so fast." "Okay." Hand in hand, the two boys ran off again. Gong Xiaoying's gaze was deeply attracted by the two children. He watched as they ran further and further away. Then, he chased after them a few steps closer. "Run slower." He heard a woman worriedly calling out to them. The voice came from the window in front. He carefully went from the backyard to the front. For the residents of this neighborhood, the courtyard facing south was the main entrance, and the back was the back door. There was an open window at the back door. A woman was sitting by the bed, holding her chin as she watched the two children run further and further away. Helpless, she sat down by the window. From his angle he finally saw clearly. It was her. The person who had waited for him all his life, the person he had missed all his life. "Ching Ching." Gong Xiaoying felt his voice tremble. His voice was so low that the woman obviously did not notice him. Instead, she looked in another direction, not knowing what she was waiting for. Perhaps, others would never be able to understand what it felt like for her to just wait by the window. What was it like to use all your strength to wait for someone? Uneasiness, fear, lost, struggle. All kinds of emotions were mixed up. Gong Xiaoying could not help but mutter, "Ching Ching." He walked towards the window. It wasn't until he got closer and closer that the girl in the window inadvertently glanced over and caught sight of him. Her eyes were fiercely startled. She saw him. Gong Xiaoying stopped in his tracks and took a deep breath. He pursed his lips, but he could not hold back his tears any longer. After brewing in his throat for a while, he finally spat out a mouthful of turbid air. His eyes were red as he looked at her. His heart was filled with longing. "It's me," he spoke in a hoarse voice. The woman stood up abruptly and pushed open the window. Chapter 4407. They were not far apart, so he could see the expression on her face. Surprise, surprise, shock, panic. Mu Qingqing covered her mouth, but she did not have the same self-control as him. Tears kept rolling down her cheeks. Xiaoying. Perhaps Mu Qingqing didn't expect that she would be able to see him again in this lifetime. She hurriedly pushed open the door and walked towards him. However, when she got closer, she immediately stopped in her tracks and maintained a distance of 3 meters from him. She didn't dare to take a closer look. The two of them faced each other, and there was a feeling of homesickness. She was afraid. When she got closer, she recognized him, but it was not him. He was also afraid. When he got closer to her and hugged her, it was all a dream. Mu Qingqing's eyes were already blurred by tears. Is it you?" she carefully confirmed. She was not sure if the man who suddenly appeared in front of her was the man she had been waiting for. Gong Xiaoying smiled helplessly. The corners of his lips curled up as his brows furrowed tightly. He took a deep breath and choked with sadness. "Qingqing, it's me. Xiaoying, Is it really you? Mu Qingqing tried to take a few steps closer to him.
She looked at him carefully until she was sure that the man standing in front of her was the man she had been thinking about and waiting for.
She could no longer suppress her emotions and completely broke down. You're here.
You're finally here. She had waited for so long. Mu Qingqing sadly threw herself into his arms and asked hoarsely, "Why are you only here now? I've waited for so long. Why are you only here now?"
Mu Qingqing nestled in his arms. Her tears could not help but wet his lapel. Gong Xiaoying carefully hugged her, afraid that he would hurt her if he hugged her too tightly. Or perhaps, he was afraid that this was just a long dream. If he hugged her too tightly, the person in his arms would turn into ashes when he woke up. Mu Qingqing hugged him tightly, and he hugged her tightly as well. Even if it was just a simple hug, they had waited for more than 20 years. Mu Qingqing sadly said, "I thought I would never be able to wait for you again." She used the last of her strength to force the words out of her mouth. "I thought I would never see you again in this lifetime. How could that be? Idiot, aren't I here now?" Gong Xiaoying hugged her tightly. "Qingqing, don't be afraid. I'm here to take you home." Her whole life, she had been drifting around helplessly, with no one to depend on. Just like migratory birds, they would never have a harbor to rest in. Hearing his words, Mu Qingqing was overjoyed. "Really? Will we have a home?" "Yes. This family has me, you, little Jia, and Shirshir."
Gong Xiaoying looked at her and sobbed even harder.
"Let's never be separated again, okay?" He held her face in his hands and scanned her features inch by inch.
He desperately wanted to take a few more glances at her.
She was still as beautiful as before. She had jet-black hair and mesmerizing eyes. They were watery and lively, as if they were carrying thousands of stars.
She stared at him as if he was the only one in her eyes.
How could she not want to take a few more glances at him? Gently holding his face, Mu Qingqing tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss his forehead.
"Xiaoying, I don't regret." She did not regret waiting for him for so long.
Chapter 4408.
"Xiaoying." Mu Qingqing stood on her tiptoes and gently kissed his forehead, the tip of his nose and the edge of his lips.
Finally, a soft kiss landed on his lips. Gong Xiaoying was immersed in the bliss of this kiss.
He closed his eyes and his eyelashes trembled violently.
Was this a dream?
Vaguely, there seemed to be a voice that was asking him silently.
"Qingqing, am I dreaming?" "Dream." Mu Qingqing laughed. "How could it be a dream? I'm still worried and scared. Is this a dream?"
"Qingqing."
Gong Xiaoying finally couldn't hold it in anymore.
He buried his face in her neck and couldn't control his tears anymore.
"I miss you so much." These 4 words couldn't express how much he missed her. He seemed to recall the first time they met. She was beautiful and moving. She looked back and smiled, and he fell in love at first sight. When they were swimming in the lake, he hugged her and kissed her ear, telling her how much he loved her. She wasn't the only woman he had. However, there were many women who passed through his life, but she was the only one who left such a deep impression. "I miss you so much." Gong Xiaoying's tears fell and burned her skin. He really missed her. Every time he woke up from a dream in the middle of the night, he felt as if he was suffocating when he thought that he would never be able to hold her in his arms again. He had also been young once, and he had also made a solemn vow of undying love with her. However, he made her wait for so long. In the end, she didn't see him. "Xiaoying, I miss you too." Mu Qingqing held his face and gently kissed his lips. However, he gradually realized that there was an empty space in his arms. He opened his eyes and saw that Mu Qingqing's body was gradually becoming transparent. "Qingqing." He suddenly panicked and reached out to grab her hand. However, the moment he reached out, his hand passed through her body. It was as if countless petals gathered together and were blown away by the wind. Mu Qingqing's gentle smile was gradually buried by the petals. Finally, it was blown away by the wind. Gong Xiaoying abruptly sat up on the bed. Only then did he realize that everything he had just seen was actually a dream. In his dream he saw her. It was as if he had returned to the place where she had been waiting for him. She was still standing guard there. However, the ending was different from reality. He had found her, and she had waited for him. The regrets of this life seemed to have come to an end because of this. Was it really just a dream? Or perhaps, she had never left.
It was as if the two of them had fulfilled their long-cherished wish through this dream. Gong Xiaoying's eyes became a little blurred. He got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside the window, the horizon in the distance was gradually turning bright. He believed it.
Mu Qingqing didn't leave.
As long as his longing for her remained, this longing would bring him to the end of the other realm, to the place where she was. And she would rely on his longing for her to return to the dream and meet him again. Love would convey each other's beliefs to the other side. Please remember me. Although goodbye must be said. Please remember me. Tears don't fall though I must go far away from you. You live in my heart, and every night of separation I sing a song for you. Please remember me. Although I must go far away, please remember me. When I hear the sadness of the guitar, this is the only proof that I am with you until I hug you again.
Chapter 4409.
Gong Jie vaguely felt that someone was sitting by the window. He forced his eyes open and saw a familiar figure sitting by his bed.
It was a woman.
Gong Jie furrowed his brows as a hand seemed to be gently placed on his forehead.
You're awake. What's wrong? Do you have a headache? Mu Qingqing's gentle voice rang in his ears.
Was it his mother? Gong Jie suddenly felt a lump in his throat. He leaned over and subconsciously hugged her waist. Mom. Slap.
Slap. Slap.
The hand that was originally on his forehead began to gently pat his face.
A voice filled with disdain sounded in front of him.
Wake up, wake up! Gong Jie finally woke up and opened his eyes wide. At this moment, a beam of sunlight shone in from the window. He realized that the sky had cleared up. The sun was high in the sky and it was shining brightly. Under the bright sunlight, he finally saw the person in front of him clearly. Hua Jin stared at him speechlessly. Gong Jie suddenly sat up from the bed and grabbed him by the collar.
What are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? Why are you glaring at me so fiercely? Hua Jin looked aggrieved. I worked so hard to take care of you for the whole night. You? Take care of me?
Gong Jie expressed his doubts.
What about me? Hua Jin sized him up and asked tentatively, What do you mean? Have you forgotten what happened last night? What happened last night?
Gong Jie frowned and looked at Hua Jin. He suddenly said something that almost made Hua Jin choke to death. Did we sleep together? Could it be that he mistook Hua Jin for a woman and something happened? Although he was drunk and did not recognize anyone, he had to admit that Hua Jin was indeed more beautiful than a woman. However, he was not the kind of man who would mess around after drinking. Hua Jin's face immediately turned red. Are you out of your mind? Gong Jie snorted. Then tell me what happened last night. Yesterday you were drunk. I was afraid that you would vomit in the middle of the night, so I stayed by your bedside and didn't sleep the whole night.
Vomit?
I remember there was a man on the news who got drunk. He was so drunk that he vomited all over his body. However, because he didn't clean up the vomit in his mouth in time, it went back into his trachea and he eventually suffocated. If you died because you were drunk, wouldn't that be a pity? Gong Jie's expression turned even uglier. Could it be that in his heart, he was that inferior? When Hua Jin saw his cold face, he was instantly annoyed.
Heh, you really have no conscience.
He stood up angrily. Just as he was about to turn around, Gong Jie took a deep breath and gently held his forehead. Because he drank a little wine last night, he had a hangover and had a bad headache. He furrowed his brows and said helplessly, Sorry, I mistook you for my mother just now. Your mother? When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately turned around and sat by the bed. He asked curiously, Is your mother called Mu Qingqing? Last night when you were drunk, you kept calling out Mom.
Are you thinking of your mother?
Sure and her father have also acknowledged each other. This is probably your mother's wish.
Chapter 4410.
Gong Jie smiled all of a sudden. She's not dead.
Not dead?
Yes. Gong Jie turned around, opened the drawer, and took out a photo frame. In the photo, a woman was sitting on a flower bed. It was a photo taken casually. There were not many photos of Mu Qingqing when she was alive. Gong Jie had put in a lot of effort, but many of Mu Qingqing's photos were lost one after another when they moved or when they were dealing with her funeral. This was his best preserved photo. Gong Jie looked at the photo with a gentle gaze that he had never seen before. She's always lived in my heart. He had never forgotten. He believed that death was not the main point of life. Forgetting was. The candle of life would not be extinguished easily. The connection between people was their memories. He had always remembered her and carefully kept her in his heart, never forgetting her. He also firmly believed that as long as her memories were still there, she would not disappear. He also believed that once a person lost their life, their soul would go to another world. Although that world did not have a warm body, it had everything that this world did not have. Hua Jin smiled when he heard that. I also believe that as long as your memories are still there, she will always live in your heart. Are you in a hurry to go back? Aren't you going to stay for a few more days? After staying on the island for a few days, Yun Shishir mentioned that she wanted to go back home. On the tarmac, the private jet had been waiting for a long time. Gong Xiaoying, however, was reluctant to part with her. He repeatedly urged her to stay, hoping that she could stay on the island for a few more days. Dad, I didn't go back with Yaja because I wanted to bury the hatchet between us. Now that we've acknowledged each other, it's time for me to go back. However, Xiaoyi Chen and you will stay for a few more days. Hua Jin and Natalia will have to stay on the island for a while longer. Alice refused to let Natalia leave. She said that you needed a long period of observation after a few days, so she could not go back with Yun Shishir immediately. Thus, she could only return alone. Gong Xiaoying held his beloved daughter's hand, but he was reluctant to let go. He couldn't bear to let her go. Yun Shishir smiled and said, "It's not like we'll never see each other again. Anyway, since you've handed over Hurricane's affairs to Shao Jie, you can come to our place to stay for a few days when you're free." However, Gong Xiaoying had his own concerns. "Shishir, do you think he will accept me?" Yun Shishir was stunned. She knew that Gong Xiaoying was worried that Mu Yaja would not accept him. "Dad, do you still hate the Mu family?" Gong Xiaoying's gaze turned complicated. He sighed and said helplessly, "Hate is just a term used by incompetent people. Rather than hating the Mu family, I might as well hate myself more." However, he used to be so proud. How could he be willing to face his own mistakes? However, at that moment he had thought things through. It was impossible to say that he did not hate the Mu family. However, he did not hate Mu Yaja as much as before. "You and he are the two most important men in my life. Since I've decided to accept you and not hate you anymore, then he will naturally let me do as I wish. He won't hate you, so don't worry." Only then did Gong Xiaoying relax a little. "I'll tell him that I'm sorry the next time we meet. He had hurt you and Xiaoyi Chen." This was his apology to Mu Yaja. Chapter 44:11. Yun Shishir was surprised that a man with such a high status like Gong Xiaoying would take the initiative to apologize to a junior like Mu Yaja. Gong Jie stepped forward and said to Gong Xiaoying, "Dad, it's getting late. Let sister go back early." Gong Xiaoying also nodded and watched Yun Shishir board the plane. The group of people waited until the plane broke through the clouds and left the tarmac. Yun Shishir returned to the country, leaving Hua Jin and the three little guys behind. Natalia's situation was not optimistic. Hua Jin was worried every day and night. Yu's condition was stabilizing, so Alice and Romanka focused more on Natalia. During the few days when Natalia was in the lab, Hua Jin and Gong Jie would accompany and protect her. Romanka and Alice discussed whether they should use Yu's treatment plan on Natalia and combine the two personalities into one. Alice was a little hesitant. Everyone's situation was different. Just like the same illness, the same treatment plan, but the results might be different for everyone. For example, taking medicine. Some people could use penicillin treatment without restraint, but some people were allergic to penicillin and could not use such medicine. Alice was worried about exactly what Romanka was worried about. He was also worried that Yu's treatment plan would not work on Natalia. Therefore, he proposed to bring Natalia back to his lab and work with other authoritative experts in this field to develop a treatment plan suitable for Alice. Alice agreed. When Alice wanted to take Natalia away, Hua Jin was naturally worried and wanted to go with them. He asked for Gong Jie's opinion, and Gong Jie agreed. After packing their luggage and setting the flight route, Alice and Romanka boarded the plane together with Hua Jin and Natalia on a sunny day. Alice and Gong Jie agreed that they would contact him as soon as they arrived at their destination. However, a day and a night passed, and Gong Jie did not receive a call from Alice. He sent a video call to Hua Jin, but there was no response for a long time. He thought that the group was too tired from the trip and went to bed early after arriving at their destination, so he did not pay much attention.
However, on the second day, and the third day, Gong Jie still did not receive a call from Alice. He could not sit still anymore and contacted the person in charge of Romanka's private lab. However, he was told that Romanka and Alice did not return to the lab. This time, he could no longer keep his calm. Just like that, the group of 4 disappeared without a trace. He sent someone to investigate the flight that Alice and Romanka were on. After the investigation, his subordinate came back and told him that the flight had changed its route midway, but the flight route had been cut off. Generally speaking, the flight route would be reported back to the headquarters during the flight. However, the plane carrying the 4 of them lost contact halfway through the journey. Some of his subordinates speculated that the plane might have been hijacked by terrorists and lost contact with them. Gong Jie could no longer keep his calm. This plane was under his private name, and the body of the plane had a particularly eye-catching logo of the Hurricane Group. Usually, when he went out, what he was most afraid of was not the weather suddenly worsening, but the terrorists who were waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 44:12. The flight route from Dark Wind Island to the research lab where Romanka was located was very long. They needed to stop midway before continuing their flight. The stopover was about 5 hours long. However, even if they stopped for 5 hours, they should have arrived at their destination long ago. Unless there was an accident. Some people analyzed and suspected that terrorists had already found out the flight route of the plane. Moreover, they might have hijacked the plane when it stopped midway. Hijacking? They did not rule out that possibility. However, who could have hijacked the plane? There were too many possibilities. Hurricane Group had many enemies, especially in the Nanzhou and Zhongdong regions. There were many organizations that hated Hurricane Group. Guessing based on this alone was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. Gong Jie was a little annoyed. Choosing to let them take the Hurricane Group's private jet was probably his biggest mistake. If they had really been hijacked, Gong Jie was 100% sure that these people must have come for him. However, there were no results at the moment. Therefore, these could only be categorized as guesses and could not be confirmed. However, as the investigation deepened, they basically ruled out the possibility of a plane crash or an air accident. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen were on Dark Wind Island. They originally planned to return to China in a few days. However, something happened to Hua Jin and Alice, so their plan to return to China was temporarily put on hold. Someone was targeting Hurricane Group. There was no news for a few days. The people sent to investigate always returned empty-handed. Even if they had really been hijacked, they should have stated their conditions. Even if they had encountered extreme terrorists and perished together, they should at least want to see the person if he was alive, and the corpse if he was dead. There was no news at all. There was really no news at all. If they did not explode in silence, they would perish in silence. For a few days, Gong Jie's mood was very low. He did not know whether Alice and the others were safe or not. However, Yu Yu repeatedly comforted him that no news was the best news. However, Gong Jie did not think so. He had never been hijacked. There were countless terrorists eyeing him, but every time he went out, Hurricane would go up and down, eyeing him covetously. The mercenary group he sent out was enough to annihilate a medium-sized armed organization. No matter how many people had their eyes on him, it would be difficult for him to break through. However, there were many side branches of the Gong family who had encountered terrifying kidnappings. The hurricane grew stronger day by day. At the same time, walking on the edge was like walking on thin ice. Every step was frightening. He remembered that when Gong Jie was not yet 18 years old, he had heard of something. Ever since he was young, one of his older brothers who had always bullied him in the Gong family was kidnapped. Rumor had it that she was abducted by a group of anti-Japanese martial artists. Following that, she was placed under house arrest for 3 months. It was said that in order to prevent him from escaping, the martial artists directly cut off the tendons in his arms and legs. In the end, Hurricane paid a hefty price to redeem him, but when he came back, he was no different from a cripple. A ransom of 50 million was just a small sum to Hurricane. The reason why he generously offered 50 million was to protect the dignity of the Hurricanes. In the end, these militants did not end up well. They dared to go against the Hurricanes, but in the end, they suffered a double loss and were ruthlessly oppressed by the Hurricanes. However, the life of the person who was kidnapped was ruined. Chapter 44:13. Originally, a high-spirited young man, after experiencing an inhumane kidnapping, returned to Hurricane, but he was depressed. In the end, his wound became infected and worsened. In the end, he died young. After experiencing this incident, Gong Jie deeply understood that in this world, the strong preyed on the weak. It was easy to go up the mountain, but difficult to go down. When a person finally reached the peak and stood there for a long time, as the saying goes, it is lonely at the top. Wanting to come down again is no longer a simple matter. As the son of Hurricane, from the moment he returned to the Gong family, he was destined to have an extraordinary life. At the same time, he also shouldered a responsibility that was 100 times more difficult than that of ordinary people. Once you entered this cruel world, it would be impossible for you to escape. Then he could only become stronger. Gong Jie had always been careful to protect the safety of his family. Every time he returned to China, he would be extremely careful whenever he met with Yun Shishir. What he was afraid of was that those who were secretly watching him would shift their attention to Yun Shishir. His sister was already married and had a family. She was no longer alone. In addition to her beloved husband, she also had 3 lovely children. He acted cautiously in everything he did, lest he bring her unexpected disaster. Hurricane was the world's arms factory. In addition to the heads of state, the government, anti-government militants, and extreme terrorists, there were all kinds of people who dealt with it. Dealing with killing must be accompanied by killing. Therefore, as the successor of the Hurricane Group, Gong Jie had long been used to the world of open and covert attacks. A moment ago, the president who signed an agreement with him and shook hands with him on friendly terms might go to the International Court of Justice to propose an express restriction on Hurricane in the next second. A moment ago, the terrorists who were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at Hurricane and threatening to bomb the headquarters of Hurricane, the next second, they stood in front of him with a flattering face, groveling and raising their orders. In this world, there were no eternal friends, only eternal interests. The world was bustling, and I came for the interests. The world was bustling, and I went for the interests. Gong Jie was worried that Hua Jin, Alice, and the others were probably targeted by the terrorists. This was still a relatively ideal suspicion. If they fell into the hands of the extremists, then the consequences would be unimaginable. Could it be someone from the Temple of Light? Gong Xiaoying and Gong Jie were sitting in the study. Both of them were at a loss of what to do. In the midst of the silence, Gong Xiaoying suddenly raised a suspicion. Gong Jie's eyelids twitched when he heard this. The Sacred Palace sect was a small sect when it was first established. Later on it became a cult. It had been 20 years since its establishment. At first, it was just an ordinary independent religious group, but after Jim came to power, it slowly began to change. Until now, the Temple of Light had more than 5,000 devout followers. One of the main beliefs of the Temple of Light was the so-called Doomsday belief. The program continued to promote that in the future, the whole world would face a catastrophe, and only those who joined his sect would be spared. The sacred church asserted that the signs of the end of the world were everywhere, such as the destruction of the ozone layer, the spread of AIDS, the outbreak of global racial conflicts, and so on. Only by joining the Temple of Light could one escape the calamity of the apocalypse, because the Temple of Light could provide the believers with the necessary supernatural abilities. Chapter 44:14. As the leader, Jim's main responsibility was to protect the believers and send them to the Holy Land, Sirius. In ancient Greek and Roman mythology, Sirius was the star where the gods gathered and had boundless magical power. Didn't the leader of the Sacred Hall, Jim, try to sign an order with you some time ago? Gong Xiaoying sized up Gong Jie and was puzzled. But you didn't satisfy him. The so-called Sacred Hall is actually a fake religion under the name of Christianity. It's an evil sect. Gong Jie furrowed his brows. Besides, guess what he said in the email? He wanted to sign an order worth tens of millions of USD to resist the restrictions of the International Federation. But he couldn't pay tens of millions of USD. What did he say in the email? He said he wanted to give me his son and daughter and his woman. Gong Jie said coldly. He said he was the son and daughter of the Holy Child and had boundless magical power. And his woman was only one of his many mistresses. He said he was the incarnation of God and she was God's woman. Gong Xiaoying heard and couldn't help but snort. I don't know if he's really crazy or just pretending to be crazy. Gong Xiaoying was a little suspicious. I heard that you humiliated him in your reply to his email. Gong Jie didn't say anything and just kept silent. How did you humiliate him? Gong Jie said. I forgot. In other words, you humiliated Jim.
That's the truth. Yeah. Then you angered him because of that. Gong Jie's face became gloomier. He didn't dare to imagine that it was really someone from the sacred hall. If it was true, then he couldn't sit still anymore. Gong Xiaoying said, I've already warned you. Stop people like the sacred hall if you can avoid them. Even if you're at a disadvantage, don't fight them head-on. They're barefooted and aren't afraid of anything. When they go crazy, they'll ignore everything. But I can't sign this order with him. Gong Jie didn't think he did anything wrong. If they get their hands on the arms worth tens of millions of dollars, who knows how crazy they will be. But you shouldn't have humiliated him like that. Gong Xiaoying went straight to the point again. You clearly know that there's something wrong with their brains. People like Jim would even think that he's a god and that his deal with you is a gift to you. If you reject him, you're going against God's will. He'll definitely teach you a lesson. Is the Sacred Hall sect so arrogant? Heh. Gong Xiaoying curled his lips coldly. What you know about the Divine Sacred Hall is superficial. Do you know that the development of the Sacred Hall sect came from the remnants of the Sacred Hall sect? These were all brainless people. Those who were afraid of hurricanes were all clear-headed. However, why would these brainless people be afraid of hurricanes? Perhaps in their eyes, hurricane is just a vassal. The remnants of the Sacred Hall sect. The Sacred Hall sect is the evil cult that developed with the old Jin Shan but was destroyed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation because of the bombing of the American International Federation's government building. Yeah, I see. Gong Jie narrowed his eyes. His thoughts gradually fell into a deadlock. If it was really done by the Sacred Hall sect, then he didn't dare to make a rash judgment. Chapter 44:15. Gong Xiaoying looked serious. If you can protect Alice, then protect her. After all, she is a senior member of Hurricane. Don't force her. Gong Jie's face turned even colder. He suddenly stood up, turned around, and looked at Gong Xiaoying. Hua Jin. Alice. Natalia. Not one less. Gong Jie turned around and left the office. Kira, send me all the information about the sanctuary. Gong Jie ordered to investigate all the information about the sanctuary. Yu Yu's face turned pale when he heard that it might be the sanctuary that did it. He knew a lot about the sanctuary. Uncle, do you know about the dark web? Gong Jie was surprised that Yu Yu mentioned the dark web to him. I know a little. The dark web was something that very few people who lived in peaceful countries could come into contact with during peaceful times. However, the dark web was very famous. There was a rumor that an international student from an American university was kidnapped. It was said that the murderer had already noticed the victim from the beginning and was lurking around her. However, no one knew whether the victim was dead or alive, or where she was now. Some people guessed that the victim might have been moved to an unknown place by the murderer. She might have died, or she might have suffered a fate worse than death. Do you know how those videos on the dark web came to be? What are you trying to say? Yu Yu frowned and said with a serious expression, there are many videos on the dark web about mutilation, killing, and all kinds of inhumane renti experiments. They all came from the sanctuary. Actually, this matter is not known to outsiders. I only learned about this because I intercepted a private email from the sanctuary's leader. Hiss. The man could not help sucking in a breath of cold air. Then, Hua Jin. His first thought was Hua Jin's safety. Even Gong Jie did not realize that at such a critical moment, he was more concerned about Hua Jin's safety than about Natalia. Yu Yu said, if it's really the Temple of Light, then it'll be troublesome. However, I think that if it is really the Sacred Palace sect, they will not do anything to Hua Jin and the others. Perhaps, they will use Hua Jin and the others as hostages to restrain Hurricane and fulfill some of their conditions. Their condition should be the $50 million military order. The Jim Church can't take out that much money at all. They want to gain something without risking anything, so they came up with this idea. But I'm sure that regardless of whether you take out the $50 million order or not, Hua Jin and Alice won't survive. Even if you really take out $50 million worth of munitions, they won't let Hua Jin go. Gong Jie felt a chill in his heart. Chapter 44:16. Gong Jie felt a little helpless. Facing the cult, he had no idea what they would do. He said, the sacred shrine is sinister and cunning. I didn't expect them to do this. But no matter what, if it's really the sacred shrine, then even if there's only a 1 in a million chance, I won't give up on anyone.
Yu Yu also agreed. Just as everyone was panicking, Hurricane suddenly received an email. There were a few photos attached to the email, and it was also a threatening letter. However, it also confirmed Gong Xiaoying's terrifying guess. An account with the name Divine Shrine Sect sent an email. There were a total of 5 photos. 4 of them were photos of Alice, Natalia, Hua Jin, and Romanka. They were tied to chairs with black hoods over their heads. Alice, in particular, was covered in wounds and bruises. Hua Jin, on the other hand, was in no better shape. Although Natalia was a child, she wasn't treated well because she was a child. She was also covered in wounds. There was another photo that Gong Jie was shocked when he saw it. In the photo, the 4 of them had their hoods removed and were kneeling on the ground. In front of them were the decapitated bodies of the crew members. It was a very intimidating photo. Glorious decapitation. The sacred shrine had done a lot of dirty things. Their usual method was to imitate extremist terrorist organizations and use decapitation to intimidate their followers. In the sacred shrine, the church set up free cafeterias, daycare centers, elderly clinics, and other social services. The followers of the sacred shrine were people who felt hopeless in life and couldn't get help from society. They were drug addicts, elderly, and lonely people. They were dissatisfied with the reality of society and felt that their future was bleak. They were terrified of nuclear war. Many of them were influenced by nihilism and thought that life was impermanent and that living was a kind of pain. Therefore, after they joined the church, they often talked about suicide. The leader of the sacred shrine even organized a mass suicide drill in Guyana. However, some followers were influenced by the ugly methods of the church, especially when they learned that leader Jim stole followers' property, faked miracles, severely punished followers, and called himself the new savior. Therefore, some followers wanted to leave the organization and secretly escape. Running away from the church was considered a betrayal. Anyone who betrayed the church, once discovered, would face a glorious execution. The divine palace believed that only with a complete body could one ascend to heaven after death. However, once a follower was beheaded, they would only have the fate of going to hell. The church would even behead these traitors in front of thousands of believers to serve as a warning to others and serve as a deterrent. This tactic was extremely intimidating, and the church had tried it many times. Gong Jie realized that all the crew members had been beheaded. It was obvious that Natalia was not in a good mental state. At such a young age, she had witnessed such a cruel scene with her own eyes. She must have suffered quite a shock. But looking at Alice and Hua Jin, it was clear that they were still calm. Only Romanka was on the verge of collapse. Alice had seen this kind of scene many times, and Hua Jin deeply understood that fear, uneasiness, and fear could not change one's fate. Instead, these emotions would only make one feel isolated and helpless. Comparatively speaking, it was better to remain calm. Chapter 44:17. However, Romanka was quite shocked, and his mental state was not good. Sacred Shrine Sect. Yu Yu looked at the photos attached to the email and slammed the screen. It's really the Sacred Shrine Sect. Gong Jie was annoyed and humiliated to the bone. These damned evil cults. This email was clearly a provocation to him. Other than the photos, the email also stated that if he wanted to redeem the 4 hostages, he would have to continue the unfinished agreement between the 2 parties. Just as Yu Yu expected, this Jim was ambitious. He really wanted to get something for nothing. In the email, the church stated that they would give Hurricane half a month to prepare the contents of the order. Within half a month, if they did not prepare the contents of the order, they would immediately execute the 4 hostages. Jim was so smart that he was sure that among the 4 people he kidnapped, there must be someone Gong Jie cared about the most. Tens of millions of dollars was not worth mentioning to Hurricane. However, these hostages were worth far more than tens of millions of dollars. Gong Jie gritted his teeth in hatred. He knew that with his identity, he would face such threats every day when he was not around. The Sacred Shrine Sect was the biggest tumor that Hurricane had to face. Hurricane had offended the Sacred Shrine Sect before. In the beginning, Gong Jie was not willing to sign the order with the Sacred Shrine Sect because the Sacred Shrine Sect was an anti-world and anti-human evil cult. If the Sacred Shrine Sect really got the order of tens of millions, it would be a disaster for the whole world. At that time, as Hurricane, they would be in a difficult position. Therefore, Gong Jie decisively refused and was prepared to fight against the Sacred Shrine Sect to the end. He thought that when the time came, He would use the International Federation's anti-evil cult authority and the United Nations deployment to eradicate the Sacred Shrine sect. However, he did not expect the Sacred Shrine sect to make the first move. Gong Jie ordered, "Immediately forward this email to the International Federation. Send it secretly." He planned to use this to cooperate with the International Federation. Hurricane had always been against the International Federation. Gong Jie was even at the top of the International Federation's wanted list. However, as the saying went, there were no eternal friends and no eternal enemies. There were only eternal interests. In front of the Sacred Shrine sect, the International Federation naturally had a common enemy like the Sacred Shrine sect and temporarily cooperated with Hurricane. Although it was a temporary alliance, at least they had a higher chance of winning. At the same time, Gong Jie was prepared for the worst. He issued an order to start preparing the orders requested by the Sacred Hall. 2 nuclear weapons, 3-in-1, and countless military munitions and ammunition. At the same time, the International Federation quickly replied to Hurricane's email. They expressed that they were willing to cooperate with Hurricane to eradicate the Sacred Shrine sect. However, the International Federation asked Hurricane unconditionally. Of course, Gong Jie was unwilling. The International Federation's goal was to eliminate the Shrine sect at all costs and regardless of the consequences. At all costs. In other words, they would not hesitate to sacrifice Hua Jin and the other 3 hostages. However, Hurricane's goal was to protect Hua Jin, Alice, and the other 2 at all costs, regardless of the consequences. Was not important.